Hello, a very warm good evening to all of you, and welcome to An Academy. Welcome, another session of our Conquer Prelims schedule and our Conquer Prelims program, where we bring for you a compilation of all the important areas of current affairs and a detailed understanding of what is required for the prelims examination, along with the practice MC. Now, in the various different stages of Conquer Prelims that we have been conducting on the channel, you would have seen that we have covered the portions associated with the current affairs from January to July 2024, and then also some portion of static places in news, the Ramsar Convention, as well as the various different new Ramsar sites, as well as the conventions and the protocol. In this particular session, what is it that you can expect out of it? In this session, we cover the important areas of current affairs which have remained in news from the month of August all the way till the month of March 2025. Now, a quick revision is something that will help you grasp the areas of prelims in a better way. So, here we shall be discussing the topics, and wherever required, we shall be taking the help of the MCQs also to see whether we are able to understand it better or not. So, we are going to discuss the various different reports, the various different species which have been in news, the regions where these species are to be found, and that will also help you understand which species to look for when you are studying for the prelims. Now, the PDF of the entire session, you can download it from the Telegram group and thereby aid your revision purposes as well. Now, starting with the first topic is where we discuss the outcomes of Conference of Party number 29. This Conference of Party 29 to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change was held in Baku, Azerbaijan in 2024. Now, this was very, very important. Now, what are the type of questions that you can expect if UPSC asks a question from this area? What are the type of questions which are to be expected? One, what is the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change? That is a kind of a question which can be asked. Then, secondly, the aspects associated with climate change, Paris Agreement, the intended nationally determined contributions made by the different countries. All these are the areas, along with the key initiatives which have been taken in Baku. So, here, first of all, for those of us who are not aware about it, a brief idea about where and what of the Conference of Party number 29. Those of you who have already covered it in the portion of the conventions and protocol video, use this as a quick revision tool. Okay. So, here, when we talk about the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC. Now, this is a convention which was arrived at Rio Summit, or what is also referred to as the Earth Summit 1992. That is when it was arrived at. So, this becomes important again as a prelims. Now, which is the funding agency for United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change? The funding body is basically GEF, Global Environment Facility. Now, Global Environment Facility has got another important organization which acts as a trustee of the funds which are required by the various different countries. And which is that institution which acts as a trustee for GEF? It is basically the World Bank. World Bank acts as a trust. Okay. Now, some of the other details associated with UNFCCC. Here, basically, in this case, the highest decision making body is what? Under this convention, the highest decision making body is basically the Conference of Parties. The Conference of Parties to UNFCCC meets annually. Now, you might think that this is a common phenomena that they would meet annually, but that is not the case with the other conventions which were arrived at the Rio Summit. At the Rio Summit, you had two other conventions, by the way. Which were those two conventions which were arrived at? So, you basically had United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, as well as Convention for Biological Diversity. This is something that we will discuss again in this session, owing to the aspect of the Kali Fund, right? Now, in these cases, the Conference of Parties does not meet on an annual basis. The meeting happens every 2 to 3 years. Okay, so that is why, while in UNFCCC, we are witnessing the Conference of Parties meeting 29, COP 29. In the case of CBD, it is still COP 16. Okay, now UNFCCC is associated with a protocol as well, as is the case with the convention. It is associated with a protocol as well. Now, regarding the details of what is a protocol, what is a convention, what is the aspect of a treaty, why a protocol is required. Again, for those of us who are unawares, I would direct you to the detailed video of conventions and protocols where we have discussed not only the timeline, but also a significant detail of why a convention is to be followed by a protocol in most of the cases. Now, having said that, in the case of UNFCCC, the protocol which is associated is the Kyoto Protocol. Kyoto Protocol is one of the very landmark protocols in terms of the climate agreement. Now, this Kyoto Protocol was arrived at the third conference of party, third COP to UNFCCC, which was held when? In 1997. Okay. Now, the planned period of Kyoto Protocol for implementation was around 2008 to around 2012, right? Around 5 years. Now, what would happen after 2012? What should be done? And what climate actions the world needs to take after 2012? Now, that was a decision which was still impending owing to the geopolitical tussle between the emitters and also between the developed and the developing part of the world. Having said that, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change talks about the greenhouse gases, limiting the emission of the greenhouse gases, and also relies heavily on the basic principle of common but differentiated responsibility, CBDR, which was further enhanced by the ideas of the Kyoto Protocol. So, there was a lot of tussle, lot of conflict regarding what should follow that Kyoto Protocol. But then, nothing had been finalized up till around 2012. So that is where you had the Doha Amendment. And that Doha Amendment extended the plan period of Kyoto Protocol up till around 2020. So Kyoto Protocol is always associated with what is the Doha Amendment. Okay? Doha Amendment extended the plan period of Kyoto Protocol beyond 22. Right? Now, again, what was to follow after 2020? For that, the world met again. And here, brokered by United States, the world arrived at a new agreement. And that agreement was arrived at in 2015 at the Conference of Parties, which was held in Paris. And that is where you had the Paris Agreement. Paris Agreement. Now, the new thing associated with Paris Agreement, as different from the Kyoto Protocol, was while Kyoto Protocol stressed upon the aspect of market mechanism, that in case, let's suppose the emitting nations, that is the developed nations, they are unable to fulfill their target of some amount of capped or emission or reduction of emission. If they are unable to meet that target, then they can always indulge in the trade of the carbon credits. That is where you had instruments such as joint implementation, clean development mechanism, as well as emission trading, which was brought into place as a consequence of the Kyoto Protocol. But then, here, each of the countries, the developed nations, they had a kind of a fixed target in terms of the emission capping. Beyond that, they were not allowed to emit. Now, Paris Agreement observed that many of the developed nations were unable to fulfill the target, and they basically blamed the protocol as saying that the targets were too steep. That is where another innovation was devised in the case of the Paris Agreement. And that innovation was INDC, intended nationally determined contribution. These were to be declared by each country. That is, imagine you yourself, rather than me giving you a target that in this month you have to finish these subjects, in this month you or in this week you have to complete all this portion of mapping, you yourself allocate a target to yourself. depending upon what your capability is and what is your contribution going to be in terms of combating the climate change. So those INDCs were to be declared by each of the countries separately. And this also involved opening up the country's internal mechanism to global stocktake. That is, every 5 years, there has to be a system for global stocktake mechanism, a monitoring mechanism where there will be a kind of an inspection to understand whether your climate actions are actually taking shape or whether it is simply out there in the thin air and nothing has materialized. So that global stocktake mechanism has to follow every 5 years. And after those 5 years, basically renewed INDCs, renewed INDC were to be declared by each of the country. Now, what if a country does not or is not able to fulfill the goal that it had set for itself? In that case, what would happen? In that case, the newer target that is set by the country has to be more aggressive, right? Much more greater than what was the previous target. So there always has to be a kind of a greater financial as well as the implementation cost associated if you are unable to fulfill those targets. That would basically force the countries to fulfill their target. So that is associated with the UNFCCC and the Paris Agreement. Now, Paris Agreement also brought into discussion another concept, and that was the concept of net zero. Net zero. Now, what is this concept of net zero? That is the amount of carbon emissions that you are emitting. You have to sequester and store as much amount of carbon compounds as right? Or carbon dioxide equivalent. So if I am emitting 100 gigatons, then the forests in my country, as well as the other industrial mechanisms, should be so adept and so significantly modified that I am able to absorb that 100 gigatons of carbon emitted. So that net addition of greenhouse gases does not happen in my region. So Paris Agreement basically motivated the countries and encouraged the countries to hit this target of net zero by the year 2050. And there was immense pressure put on countries like India and China. After all, India is the third largest emitter if you consider amongst the top five, if you consider the overall emission, right? But then at COP 26, which was held in December 2021 in Glasgow, that is when India declared its net zero target. And India said that we will fulfill the net zero target in 2070. That was a part of India's aim, what is referred to as Panchamrit mission. Panchamrit. This was declared at when? UP 26. That is in 2021. Okay. So these were the major developments. Along with this, India had declared other goals as well, reducing the carbon intensity in the GDP to around 45%, then basically having a greater share of renewables in the entire energy mix, having almost 50% of the renewable energy mix. All that were the goals which were declared by India as well. So that are and these are the background that you need to be able to understand, and in order to score good in the exam, you need to be able to recollect and recall all of this. Okay, I hope this is clear. Now when we talk about COP 29, now COP 29, which was held in Baku, was on the face of lot of grievances from the developing nations. The developing nations facing the wrath of climate change, they always wanted a greater amount of resources from the developed countries under the principle of CBDR. But for the past couple of years, the developed countries have started retaliating back and saying that countries like China and India, they are supposed to provide greater amount of money to combat climate change. After all, these are large emitters. Countries like India and the other countries of global south have argued that if you still take a look at the per capita emission of India and the other countries of global south, it is much lesser as compared to the developed economies of the west. So there has been an ongoing tussle. Under this, New collective quantitative goal for financing and other financing instruments were discussed in Baku in great detail. So, for the exam, again, you have to keep a pinpointed focus on what will be required for the exam, right? So, in places in news, we have covered that because it was held in Baku, Baku also becomes important for your mapping purposes on the shores of the Caspian Sea, the city of winds, if you have seen that video. But then, other than that, which were the initiatives, the important initiatives discussed at COP29 Baku? Now, here, the new collective quantified goal on climate finance, NCQG. Now, you see, the discussion for NCQG had been going on for a long period of time. That this is something that we will start in 2024 because 2024 would mark the 5 years since the implementation of the Paris Agreement. So that is why the various different countries had been discussing it for a long time. That after 5 years of implementation, we would discuss again that when the developed countries are asked to spend $100 billion a year for climate action, that is clearly insufficient. So, countries like India, for example, they had been asking developed countries to pull in at least close to $1.2 trillion annually if you really want to combat climate change. Otherwise, all this money that you are spending, that is merely cosmetic, will have no effect, right? So that is where, in order to break the deadlock and in order to ensure that the developed countries they pay more, that is where in 2024, finally, the convening of new collective quantified goal on climate finance did happen. Now, the target for finance annual disbursement, right? What should be the annual disbursement? As I told you, the developed countries want to spend close to around $100 billion per year, and developing nations, they want close to around $1 trillion per annum. And they cite the damages caused due to climate events. For example, if you consider India, now India has suffered immensely over the past couple of decades due to events of climate change, be it cloudburst in the region of Uttarakhand and Himachal Pradesh, landslides in the region of Wayanad, or even the landslides triggered in the region of the northern Himalayas, the glacial lake outburst floods, which are becoming frequent, the avalanches in the region of Jammu and Kashmir, and all these events that I'm talking about is within the span of the last year itself. Other than that, frequent cyclonic and hurricane events which impact the country's shoreline and impact a large section of the population as well. So there is a massive impact in the developing world. And that is where the developing world wanted more. But then the developed world, led by US. Now, US basically, at the time when this COP was being conducted, US was going through a transition of administration. The Trump administration withdrew from the Paris Agreement. The previous Trump administration had also withdrawn from Paris Agreement. Biden administration made it a point that US joins the Paris Agreement again, but Trump again withdrew from it. So that makes US the only country to have withdrawn from one agreement twice within the same decade. It is the only country in the modern history. So that also is a unique snippet that you should know. Having said that, what should be the priority in terms of disbursement? How should funds be allocated? Which country should get the funds? This was also a discussion in the case of NCQG. Now, the ask was to triple the finances to minimum or at least of $300 billion annually, if not around $1.2 trillion, what India had been asking, at least around $300 billion annually by 2035, right? Now, efforts to mobilize almost $1.3 trillion by 2035. And as you can expect, this experienced a wall of resistance. While some of the developed countries were forthright to commit that, okay, in the future, we will see, in the future, we might invest that much. But many of the developed nations like Australia, etc., they basically shielded the move that they were unable or not ready to make any commitment when it came to finance. Okay. Now, there was the discussion for the enhanced transparency framework as well. After all, this has been a major lacune or the sticking point in the Paris Agreement. You see, under the aegis of the Paris Agreement, all the countries basically understood and they thought about it that, okay, let us all set our own goals, right? The INDs. But what is to say that whether I have fulfilled the goal that I had set or not? For example, five of you today set your own goals that I will finish polity, I will finish geography, environment, history, economy, like that. Now, at the end of the month, who is to say whether you have actually finished it or whether you have sleepwalked your way through the subject? So that is where you need that transparency. And that is an important part in the implementation. Now, many of the countries have been very, very resistant in order to agree to this ETF. But for your exam, what you have to know that enhanced transparency framework is associated with what? It is associated with Conference of Parties number 29 to UNFCCC. A question can be framed that ETF is a mechanism which deals with Convention to Combat Desertification. So you have to be careful about these kind of questions which can be popped up from this topic. Biennial transparency reports, right? So every couple of years, these biennial transparency reports need to be submitted. Now, they are submitted by the countries under ETF. For the first time under COP29, you had 13 BTRs which were actually submitted. Baku Declaration on Global Climate Transparency and Baku Global Climate Transparency Platform, these were launched in order to make it much more transparent. Right? Now, after this, some of the other initiatives important for your prelim. You had the Baku Harmonia Climate Initiative for farmers. Now, what you need to know under this is that which is the organization which was helpful and instrumental in launching this particular initiative and what this initiative is actually about. So, basically, this is an initiative which is pioneered by Food and Agriculture Organization FAO, right? Hosted by FAO as a part of the FAST partnership. What is this FAST partnership? So basically, food and agriculture for sustainable transformation. After all, I will show you with the help of the image as well and a graphical representation when we talk about the Living Planet report that food production as it is happening right now, it is leading to twin problems. First problem is the mannerism and the amount of food that we are producing that is not sufficient to fulfill the nutrient requirement. Mind you, now the world has switched over to food scarcity to nutrient scarcity. So the food which is being produced, that is not sufficient to fulfill the nutrient requirement of the entire increasing global population. At the same time, the practices of our food production, they are absolutely unsustainable. For example, when we talk about let's suppose we consider the case of India. Now, in India, when we talk about the cultivation of crops like paddy, now, in the case of paddy cultivation, what do? We flood the land with water, flood irrigation as it is referred to. Same is the case in almost all the tropical regions where you carry out that flood irrigation. Now, when you carry out that flood irrigation, there is a lot of methane which is stored in that water. As the sapling grows into a plant, lot of methane gets produced and gets stored in that stagnant water. The water will evaporate, leading to the emission of methane and discharge of methane into the atmosphere. And that is single handedly responsible for one of the larger methane emissions across the world. That is the agricultural practices, be it even animal slaughter or enteric fermentation in the case of bovine and milch cattle, as well as when we talk about rice production, there is substantial amount of methane production. And that is a worry. Even UPSC has picked up this worry. That is why you would observe that in the past few years, UPSC in the prelims has been asking you questions associated with direct seeding of rice and the aspect associated with rice cultivation. It is not that UPSC has suddenly gotten interested in whether you consume rice or not, because rice is one of those crops which is in too much of discussion owing to the impact on climate and its impact on overall warming. Now, what is this FAST partnership? It is a multi stakeholder partnership which was launched when? COP27. COP27 to UNFCCC was held where? This was held at, do we have an idea? Very good, Rakesh. At the region of Sharm el Sheikh in, that is where it was. This COP27, by the way, is also known for initiating the discussion for loss and damage funds. That was also one of the major outcomes of this COP27. So loss and damage funds finalized in COP28, but the discussion was started in COP27. Again, relevant for your prelims. Okay. Global methane pledge was not arrived at COP27, by the way. Global methane pledge, for those of us who are not aware about global methane pledge, it is a coming together or a partnership of various different countries initiated and led by European Union and US, that was arrived at COP26, where India declared its Panchamrit goals. That was the global methane pledge to reduce the overall emission of methane by 30% by the year 2030. That is the global methane pledge. India has not been a partner to that global methane pledge. It is not a member for two reasons. One, India was not consulted prior to the formation of the global methane pledge. And second reason, that it will have a direct impact on India's agricultural setup, which India right now is not in the stage to significantly reform or upend our food production mechanism. As I told you, rice being one of those particular important crops, right? Now, the transformation of global agri-food systems by 2030, focusing on the people, climate, and also the nature in terms of how it impacts the nature cultivation of food in many of the cases. For example, take the case of palm. Now, palm oil is cultivated in various areas of South Asia. Now, palm oil has got a detrimental impact on the soil in the region by in a way depleting and draining out the soil fertility, ensuring that the soil in that area becomes water scarce, and at the same time there is a slight imbalance in the nutrient availability of the kind of a monoculture practice. So the nature is impacted when you grow or you carry out such agricultural practices. Some of the most impacted nations by palm oil are basically Malaysia as well as Indonesia. Under this, and in order to reduce its dependency on Malaysia and Indonesia, India had started its own national mission on oil palm with concentrated focus in the areas of northeastern states as well as Andaman Nicobar Islands. Right? Now, acknowledge fundamental role of farmers as agents of climate action. Farmers have been typically ignored when it comes to climate action. Another important initiative was the Climate Finance Action Fund. The Climate Finance Action Fund will be established as an investment fund focused on income generating investments in developing economies. Again, a funding mechanism, right? Which kind of investment or which kind of projects will get the money from this fund? So, climate related projects, renewable energy production projects, research and development to innovate new climate solution. So if let's suppose, even what does that mean? Let's suppose tomorrow you and I we get together to open up a new industry in, let's suppose, climate solutions or cooling energy solution. So there we can approach the Climate Finance Action Fund for the disbursement of grants. So this will promote the industrial industries in that sector and also in a way help us develop newer research and development technologies which will help us combat climate change. Okay. Now the finance, this is where MCQs can be framed. One is 50% of the contribution will be allocated to helping meeting members the next generation of NDCs, nationally determined contribution. Means if let's suppose as the country I have said that the carbon intensity of my GDP will reduce by 50%, that means I will have to go for green steel manufacturing. I would have to go for a better mechanism of cement manufacturing, a cleaner mechanism of aluminium manufacturing. For that, what do I need? I need better research and development. I need newer investment. So where do I get that investment from? The CFA. Okay. So here, 50% of those contributions will be targeted to meet the NDC to ensure that the temperature rise is within the 1.5 degrees Celsius target, which has been set as per the Paris Agreement. Then 20% of the revenues generated will be deposited in a rapid response funding facility. Right. So concessional and grant based support, which can be immediately mobilized in case of adaptation mechanisms. Okay. Now, other initiatives, global matchmaking platform. This was launched basically for industrial decarbonization, was launched by UNIDO. So here the organization becomes important for your prelims, right? Industrial Development Organization. So UNIDO launched this industrial decarbonization, right? Global matchmaking platform. Now, to decarbonize heavy emitting industries in developing and emerging economies by connecting countries with global technical and financial resources wherever required. That is the work of Global Matchmaking Platform. Origin, it was conceptualized at COP28. COP28 was held where? It was held in Dubai, UAE. Okay. Dubai, UAE, where COP28 was held. So, this global matchmaking platform was conceptualized there itself, right? Now, under the Climate Club framework, officially launched at COP29, and the agencies involved UNIDO, Climate Club, German Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Climate Action, World Bank. Now, initial funding would be provided by the German government as well. So, that is another. So, here again, a quick recap. What is it that we have discussed till now? We have discussed the modalities of UNFCCC. We have discussed about Conference of Parties number 29. We have discussed about NCQG, the new financing mechanism. What is it that the developing nation wants, and what is it that the developed nations are ready to give? Then we have discussed about other two important initiatives. CFAF, what is the purpose of that? So investment in income generating sectors such as renewable energy, R&D, etc. Other than that, global matchmaking platform for industrial decarbonization. This is initiated and pioneered by the UNIDO. Other than that, the Baku Harmonia mission by FAO under the FAST partnership, which was launched under COP27 itself but finalized in Baku. This is to ensure food availability and nature based solution for agricultural growth by the year 2030. Right? So I hope these are the initiatives which are recalled. Good. Now, after this, we move on to the next topic. Right? Now, when we talk about the next topic before that, here in the case of this matchmaking platform, this is again something that you can recall, that is the pilot countries. The pilot countries for the matchmaking platform: Argentina, Chile, Egypt, Indonesia. Then funding supported initially by the German government, as I have already mentioned. Technology transfer facilitates adoption of low carbon industrial technologies, heavy industries, and their decarbonization, strengthens the north south climate cooperation because the industrial countries need to decarbonize. And the industrializing countries like India also need to walk on the path of decarbonization from right now. Okay, so that marks the end of the first topic. Now, before we move on to the second topic, a very important announcement for all of you. Now, this year, as you all would be aware, that results have been declared, and we here are proud to announce a stellar success of many of the paid learners, where we have 80 plus learners who cracked civil services 2024 with flying colors. I'm sure that is something which motivates all of you to work even harder. Now, these results also indicate a kind of a new motivation which should be instilled in each one of you in order to ensure that your name is also on the merit list. We at Unacademy can always be present here to help you in that process if you want so. Having said that, we have come up with a lucrative offer of the lowest ever price of 19,999 for the products, where you can attend the GS sessions, where you can attend the lectures from various educators that you want. You can take the test series, paper evaluation, mentorship program, etc. Use the code IS English and thereby be a part of the preparation and your own success journey. Now, having said that, moving on to the second topic, that is Global Peatland Hotspot Atlas 2024. This peatland has been an area which has been in the interest of UPSC, at least the paper setters, for the past 4 to 5 years now. Right now, peatlands, they are one of the largest carbon storages. These are the areas where basically the amount of carbon storage is very high. So, what is a peatland? We'll talk about that as well. But who has published it? First of all, that is important. And here I would suggest all of you a simple mechanism. See, today in the session we will be discussing, and we have been discussing various different topics, various different reports will be discussed. What you should do is A4 sheet paper, blank A4 sheet paper, initiative, organization. Initiative, organization. If required, after each one of these, match the following: one sentence, not more than that. That's it. And do revise it from now till your prelims every 3 days. Okay, do take a glance at that piece of paper. That will make your confidence level go much higher up, and you won't be scrambling through notes and the various videos 1 week prior to the prelims. Okay, that is where a lot of confusion and the genesis of negative marking begins. So do that work right now. As you watch the session, you can keep a piece of paper, the atlas, for example, that is the Global Peatland Atlas, UNEP. That's it. That is all the work that you need to do. So published by UNEP under the Global Peatland Initiative, and the purpose of publishing this is provide data and insights into the global state of where most of the global peatlands are situated. We'll talk about that as well, right? Highlight threats and opportunities for conservation and sustainable management, bridge the gap between science and the policymaking. For example, we know the scientific aspect of the conservation of peat, the role of peat. But then what is its importance, and is it something which is implemented on the ground or not? That is something which the peatland atlas seeks. Why do you need to know these facts? Because in the MCQs, in the multiple choice questions, and in the multiple statement kind of MCQs, you get one of these statements, that this is the aim of the atlas. Now, when you think about global peatland atlas, any candidate on a prima facie basis will think that this is just the demarcation of the peatlands. This is where you have to be particularly careful about the sentences such as forming the linkage between science and implementation of policy. Okay. Now, what are peatlands? So, when we say peatlands, terrestrial water ecosystem, not marine, not aquatic, terrestrial. Terrestrial wetland ecosystem in which waterlogged conditions prevent plant material from fully decomposing. You observe these swamps and the marshy areas that you see on the screen. These are your peatlands, where you have submerged vegetation. Now, that vegetation has not fully decomposed by now. It is simply submerged, right? Now, understand the basic importance or relevance of it. When we talk about vegetation, any kind of plant life, those plant materials, they will absorb CO2 from the atmosphere, sequester CO2 from the atmosphere to carry photosynthesis. Now, if they are buried somewhere, that means they are storing that carbon, isn't it? Let's suppose they are buried underwater here. So they are storing all that carbon underwater. Now, if tomorrow, due to global warming or due to heating effect, let's suppose this water tends to evaporate, then what will happen? All those plant materials will be exposed to the atmosphere. As a consequence of that, what will it lead to? It will lead to emission of methane, CO2, etc. And that will cause further warming, which will lead to the evaporation of more amount of water from the peatland. So this is a continuous feedback mechanism and a loop. So the production of organic matter exceeds its decomposition, which results in net accumulation of peat. Okay, net accumulation of an organic substrate of sorts, dark brown to black in nature, in coloration, very similar to the property of a soil. That is what peat refers to. Peat is also considered to be one of the first stages in the carbonification process, which eventually, over a millions of years, will lead to the formation of coal. Okay, so that is something which is present in these peatland. Okay, now role in climate control. So here stores carbon, right? That means this carbon is removed from atmosphere, removed from atmosphere, and as it is removed from atmosphere, reduced greenhouse effect, and that reduced greenhouse effect, right, will provide reduced warming. But at the same time, you have to understand the dire effects if that peatland vanishes. So here, when we talk about this peatland, evaporation, let's suppose warming, due to warming, there is evaporation. That evaporation leads to exposure of the carbon compounds or organic material, exposure of organic materials, right? When you have exposure of the organic materials, that means release of methane, CH4, CO2, etc. That increases the level of warming, increases the greenhouse effect. When the greenhouse effect increases, as a consequence to that, more evaporation, and this is a feedback. Okay, so the peatlands, which are, yes, natural carbon sinks, one of the largest storages of natural carbon. Okay, so those peatlands are under threat, be it in Siberia, be it in the region of Congo. In all these areas, they are under threat because due to global warming, there is immense amount of evaporation which has been initiated from these. Okay, now the findings of that study: peatlands occupy only 3% of the Earth's surface, hold close to around 600 billion tons of carbon, and an important metric, it surpasses the amount of carbon stored in the forests. When we think about the natural storage of carbon, we think about the forest areas. So it surpasses the amount of carbon which is actually stored in the forest biomass combined. Merely 17% of the peatlands are safeguarded worldwide. Now, peatlands, are they present only in the tropical regions of the world? No. They are available both in the boreal, the temperate, as well as the tropical regions. In both the areas, the peatlands are actually. Now, the countries with most peatlands, this becomes relevant for the exam, right? Important. So, where will you find most amount of peatlands? Canada, Russia, Indonesia, US, and Brazil, they are the top five. These top five contain 70% of the global peatland. But overall, when you consider the top 10 countries, then you have DRC, China, Peru, Finland, and the Republic of Congo. These are the areas where peatlands are actually dominant. Difference between a peatland and a wetland. When we talk about a peatland, right, it will always have a greater amount of vegetation which is stored in them as compared to a typical wetland. Okay. Now, when we talk about wetlands, wetlands many of the times can have much more water, for example, the reservoirs, etc., as compared to a normal peatland. Okay. So they are slightly different. Now, wetlands are known for large amount of terrestrial plant. Peatlands are identified with buried plants, the plants which have been buried, right? And they are unable to get decomposed. Okay. So these are some of the minor differences. Threats to the peatlands, mostly anthropogenic, other than the climate change leading to evaporation and loss of water, extensive drainage and degradation from commercial agriculture like paddy, etc., which drains the water from the region. Many of the times, aquaculture is also carried out, which impacts the water storage capability in these peats. Forestry, mining, infrastructure development, and peat extraction for fuel and horticulture, particularly in the boreal region, the temperate region, where that peat which is extracted is sun dried to form a kind of a solid charcoal, and that is used as a fuel for the fireplace, right, to keep the place warm. So this is where the peatlands are facing imminent. Okay. Now, coming to the third topic, that is the state of world's mangroves 2020. Now, what is important for this from this in the examination? Here, the distribution of mangrove, where basically mangroves are present and in what quantity the mangroves are present. So that chart that I will indicate to you, please ensure that you write the key pointers of the chart again in the A4 sheet. That is important for your exam. Okay. So the State of Mangrove 2024 was released by which agency? Global Mangrove Alliance, right? On World Mangrove Day. World Mangrove Day is held on 26th of July. World Wetlands Day is held when? World Wetlands Day is held on the eve of the signing of the Ramsar Convention. That is 2nd of Feb. World Mangrove Day and World Wetland Day. These are important. Now, the Global Mangrove Alliance brought about the state of world's mangrove. Right. Now, here, Southeast Asia holds about one third of the world's mangroves, with Indonesia alone accounting for 21. This is where understand that when we talk about Indonesia, Indonesia has got two very important aspects. One, the mangrove population, the diversity of mangroves as well. And secondly, the coral population and the diversity of coral. So, whenever you have any of the alliances or any of the global forum and partnership dealing with mangroves or corals, Indonesia is an important player in that. For example, when we talk about mangroves, now you also had at COP27 to UNFCCC. This is just an added information for you guys. At Conference of Parties and after COP, in fact, after COP27, you basically had Mangrove Alliance for Climate. Okay. This is where Indonesia, along with UAE, was an important founding member. UAE, Australia was also there, but Indonesia was an important member. That is Mangrove Alliance for Climate. Okay. That was after COP27. So, Indonesia, owing to its islands, owing to the numerous islands that it has, owing to the shallow waters in many of the regions, and also owing to the tropical nature of the climate, that has got both abundance of mangrove as well as corals. Now, here, when you talk about the overall mangrove population, observe that you have dominance of mangroves when you talk about Southeast Asia. Southeast Asia occupies a whopping 33.5% of the mangrove population. So, maximum mangrove population present in which geographical area of the world? Southeast Asia. Then, after that comes West and Central Africa at 15.5%. Then comes North and Central America and mostly the Caribbean. Right? Central America and Caribbean is where you will again have mangroves. Then comes South America. So these two of top four in terms of the order, they need to be recalled. So most abundant, Southeast Asia, right? Not South Asia, Southeast Asia. Southeast Asia, followed by West Africa and Central Africa, right? Then after that, North and Central America and Caribbean. Caribbean again is an important area. And Central America, right? And Caribbean. And after that, you basically have the region of South America. Okay. So these are the top four. This is something you need to recall. Okay. Now, yes, Mono. For Mangrove Alliance, UAE and Indonesia were the founding members. Now, benefits of mangroves, they go for greater amount of carbon sequestration. Because the leaf density is very high, then after that they are able to support a large amount of biodiversity. For example, in the region of Borneo, you will even find species of clouded leopards in the region of the mangroves. In India, in the region of mangrove population in West Bengal in Sundarbans, you will even be able to find not only saltwater crocodiles but also the home of the Royal Bengal tiger. So you will have many different kind of species, including the birds. Most of these mangrove dominated areas are important bird areas as well. Take the example of the Korenga Wildlife Sanctuary off the coast of Andhra Pradesh, dominated by mangroves, estuarine ecosystem, but at the same time, very important stoppage area for the migratory species of birds across the Central Asian or the East Asian flyway as well. Now, flood reduction, they act as a buffer and absorb more water, prevention of coastal erosion, which is already being felt in the regions like Sriharikota, where we have the satellite launch. So, there the coastal erosion is basically happening. Now, food security, obviously, owing to the ecosystem services that it provides. Now, for the solution to it, the Atlas also talks about that the help or the benefit of the mangroves. So they provide you with the food, provide fish, seafood, non-aquatic food, livestock fodder, etc. Now, that sale of that food item will also help generate some amount of income for the local community. So sale of fish and other products generate income. So that provides access, right? Utilization of timber for cooking purposes, and also stable environment for food production. So food security is at the heart of the entire mangrove ecosystem. Challenges, regions like, for example, Myanmar. There again, in the coastal areas, tropical coastal areas, you will find the presence of mangroves, but the loss of mangroves owing to agriculture and aquaculture are massive. So, conversion to aquaculture, oil palm plantation and rice cultivation together account for 43% of the mangrove. Okay? So, this is again important. In India, by the way, also, you have an estuarine mangrove ecosystem in the region of Goa, which is used not only for paddy cultivation, but at the same time for aquaculture, where rearing of prawns, shrimps, and small species of fishes take place. And that is what is also referred to as the Khazan ecosystem. Khazan ecosystem. Okay. That is something which takes place in the estuarine region of Goa. Right. Now it is something which is being practiced in many areas, but that is where it began. Estuarine mangrove region of Goa. Okay. So where you have paddy cultivation, aquaculture, all of them. Natural retraction, climate change, sediment shift, coastal erosion, sea level rise. That is also something which threatens the mangrove ecosystem. Now, more frequent cyclonic storms, and also only 40% of the global mangroves are actually in the protected area. So they need urgent amount of conservation. Now, this map basically represents the amount of mangroves and the mangrove population in various areas. While you don't need to rectify these maps, here, what is important to understand for your examination perspective is basically that in this region of India and Sri Lanka, the mangrove loss is particularly aided by sea level rise, sedimentation, and lack of fresh water supply. That is why India and Sri Lankan ecosystem, they are losing the mangrove. Then, basically, in the region of the islands here, mangrove has been lost. Why? Because there has been the extension of agriculture, aquaculture again. In the region of New Zealand, however, New Zealand and other Pacific islands, mangroves are expanding. So that is an aberration. That is a separate aspect. Then, in the western portion of Africa, oil and gas extraction along with agricultural extension. Then, in the region of Central Americas, here the mangrove loss is happening due to frequent hurricanes and cyclones, the cyclonic events due to the warming event, they have become very, very frequent, right? So in various different regions, what is the impact and why is it so? In India, sea level rise, sedimentation, lack of fresh water supply. These are the three important pivotal regions. In New Zealand, mangrove is area is increasing, going to better management practices. However, the state of forest report also indicates to us that the amount of mangrove vegetation or the area under mangrove vegetation has been steadily increasing. But then there has been losses which have been made in the previous decade. So thereby it will take some time for it to recover. Okay. Now, in Indian context, the order, the arrangement. So West Bengal, the largest mangrove area is in West Bengal, followed by Gujarat, associated with the region around the Gulf of Cambay, the Gulf of Kambat. So West Bengal in the region of Sundarbans, where you have the very famous Sundari tree mangrove. Then Gujarat, right, in the Gulf of Kambat and Gulf of Kutch. Okay. Now the mangroves, another important aspect for your prelims before we move ahead, you have to understand the adaptations that the mangroves go through in order to withstand the salty environment or submerged water conditions. The mangroves go through various adaptations. What are the adaptations? They go for basically salt secreting glands, right, where the leaves have salt secreting glands, viviparity, adventitious root, right? So these are some of the very famous adaptations that the mangroves go through. Yes, along with that, they will have pneumatophores as well. So these four: pneumatophores, salt secreting glands, adventitious roots, as well as viviparity in order to survive the condition. Beautiful. Now, here, these are the guiding principles for mangrove restoration. Safeguard nature and maximize biodiversity. Best information practices need to be deployed. High integrity capital. That is, what do we mean by high integrity capital? That is not a random disbursement of fund, but a fund which is particularly earmarked for a purpose and where the disbursement of the fund is close to trap. So that is high integrity capital, sustainability. Let us take a practice question. Let me know what the answer is. Consider the following statement about the mangrove ecosystem. Southeast Asia and Pacific Islands are the two regions which represent the maximum share of mangrove vegetation. Rising sea level is a threat leading to reduction in population. What do you think is the correct answer in this case? Is it going to be C? Okay. When we take a look at the Pacific Islands, what is their contribution in terms of the mangroves? So here, if you take a look at the Pacific Islands, it is a meager 3.9%. So the largest two regions will be what? Largest two regions will be Southeast Asia and West and Central Africa. These will be the largest two areas. Okay. So the first statement which is framed there, the first statement is incorrect. When it is said, are the two regions which represent the maximum share of mangrove. Is that factually correct? No. That is why I told you that first four in terms of the amount, that is, again, I will repeat and thereby repeat along with me. Southeast Asia, West and Central Africa, North and Central America, along with the Caribbean, and fourth, South America. These are where you have the dominant mangrove population. Okay. Mind you, in UPSC, in prelims does not give you the option to switch over from C to B that quickly that you have done in the comment section. So be very careful when you attempt these questions. Rising sea level is a threat leading to reduction in population. Correct. Right? So the correct answer in this case is basically B. That is right. Now, Asian Waterbird Census 2025 that was conducted in the region around Korenga and the adjoining wetland. Korenga is where? Eastern coast of India, near the region of the mouth of River Godavari, where it forms a delta and a large estuary having multiple mangroves in the region. So as I was telling you, it becomes a part for the migrating species of birds. Now, this Asian waterbird census citizen science program for the conservation of the water bird, right? Conducted annually to monitor the population of water birds in the Asian region. That is the Asian waterbird census. And it is a part of the global international waterbird census, which is coordinated by Wetland International. Wetland International, by the way, is also a part of the Ramsar Convention, if you keep that in mind, right? So, Wetland International conducts the international waterbird census. And this international waterbird census has got a subpart that is the Asian waterbird census. Okay. Now, initiated in 1987 and covers major regions of Asia wherever migratory species of birds are involved. So, from Afghanistan eastwards to Japan, Southeast Asia, Australasia, the entire region. So, maybe a direct question might not be asked from this, but then the region of Korenga becomes important, and at the same time, the flyways, which are used by the migratory species of birds, that also becomes important associated with this particular topic. Now, the census thus covers the entire East Asian Australasian flyway and a large part of Central Asian fly. Okay. In India, it is conducted by which organizations? BNHS, that is the Bombay Natural History Society, and Wildlife Institute of India. This is again an important area to know. Now, these are some of the flyways. Okay, please keep in mind that through India there are three flyways which exist over India. One is Central Asian flyway, then you have West Asian East African flyway, which exists in the region around the wetlands across the region of Himachal, Punjab, then the region of Haryana, some parts of Rajasthan, Gujarat. That is where you will find species associated with East African and West Asian East African flyway. Then you also have the East Asian Australasian flyway. Okay, these are the three flyways which you need to recall for your examination perspective. I'm assuming that none of us are targeting rectifying all the flyways, but if you are aware about the flyways, fair enough, that is good, but at least three of them should be recallable. Okay. Now, Korenga Wildlife Sanctuaries, there the key findings have happened. Now, you don't need to go into the details of how many bird species, what number of species were counted. This is something just to give you an idea about what was involved in the waterbird census, Asian waterbird census. Most of them were migratory species, right? Three of the species which were monitored, they are endangered. So these species become important: blackberry tern, great knot, and Indian skimmer. Indian skimmer is a species which has also been in discussion under which convention? Under the Bonn Convention or Convention on Migratory Species between India and Bangladesh. It is a migratory bird species, right? So this Indian skimmer has been in news. We have covered it in multiple places previously as well. Under the important Ramsar sites video also we have covered it, and the previous Conquer Prelims video also we have covered it. So no point of repeating that again. You can take a look at that video along with the image. When it comes to great knot, that is something you should be aware of. So it is a Veda, right? Basically, it is a Veda and striped brown with indistinct white eyebrow. Now, obviously, the features of them, the coloration pattern of them, etc., that is not something that you are expected to know. But just to understand that when you have a question which is framed in the prelims, for example, UPSC frames that Mahasir is which kind of animal or organism. So when you have the such kind of a question about great knot, this is just to indicate that it is a bird, right? A water bird of sorts, and hence a Veda. Now, trump is pure white, tail is tipped with gray. Breeding plumage consists of darker upper parts that are associated with the. Let us take a look at the practice MCQ in this case. Consider the following statements about the Asian waterbird census. It is a part of the global international waterbird census carried out by BirdLife International. In India, it is carried out by Bombay Natural History Society and Wildlife Institute of India. Let me know what is the correct answer in this case. So here, it is a part of global international waterbird census carried out by BirdLife International. Is that correct? Yes or no? So again, I will take you back, right? So here, coordinated by Wetland International, not BirdLife International. Please be very, very careful when you are taking a look at this. You assume that it will be written as Wetland International. Okay. In India, it is carried out by BNHS and Wildlife Institute of India. That is correct. So here you have to find which of the statements are incorrect. So the answer in this case will be A. That is one only. Okay. I hope that is clear. Now, Climate Risk Index 2025, in terms of, first of all, again, which is the agency which has released it and what are the properties associated. So, countries here are ranked based upon how vulnerable they are to the climate change and what is the overall impact that they face owing to the concept or the aspect and the eventualities of climate change. So, it is released annually by German Watch. Very important. That Climate Risk Index 2025, the easiest kind of statement which can be framed, is released annually by UNEP. Immediately, most of you will think it is correct. UNEP climate, they should release, but released by German one. By the way, UNEP was formed when? I hope we recall these for environment. UNEP was framed and formed in 1972, owing to the Stockholm Conference, which happened in 1972. Okay? Yes. So countries are ranked based upon how vulnerable they are to the extreme weather events in terms of the loss of life, the fatalities per 10,000 population. What is the overall impact? Based upon that, there's a chart prepared and the countries are ranked accordingly. So here, absolute and relative parameters in terms of economic loss, fatalities, and the affected people. Based on these parameters, the ranking is done. India ranks sixth amongst the top 10 countries most affected by extreme events, right, over the last three. Overall, more than 400 extreme events have occurred in India over the past couple of decades. And we have been discussing this time and time again that India has been a hotspot of these extreme climate eventualities. So when we talk about the climate risk event, you observe this is where India is placed. Okay, sixth. Dominica is the most impacted, followed by China, Honduras, Myanmar, Italy, and then comes India. In the case of India, you will find that population affected per 100,000, that is very high because of droughts, heat waves, and flooding events along with cyclones, which are very common. However, our disaster preparedness and the ability to prepare against cyclonic events, etc., they have reduced the share of fatalities. Okay, but affected per 100,000 in India is substantially. So, Dominica is something which should be kept in mind. India is something which, okay. Now, 10 most affected countries overall, if you take a look at it. So, basically, annual average, that is where most affected countries, right? So, this is 1993 to 2022 over a span of 2 decades. Only in 2022, if you consider, then the most affected country was Pakistan. In that case, India does not figure in the top 10. And why Pakistan? Owing to the massive flood in the Indus River basin. Okay. Now, the key pointers indicated by this risk index report, first of all, 1.5 degrees Celsius threshold as compared to the pre industrial level has been reached in 2024. Mind you, the target of the Paris Agreement is to hit that or limit the warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius by the year 2100. That has been breached as early as in 2024 itself, right? Without higher ambitious NDCs, the impact will be much more massive. There have been weak commitments both by the developed and the developing nations when it comes to NDCs, climate financing, and so on. So, insufficient financing is a major impact there. And principles of CBDR are being challenged. These are the things that we have already discussed. Then comes another important report, adaptation gap report. Who releases adaptation gap report? So basically, this is something which is released by UNEP, United Nations Environment Program. Okay, a very important organization. So this talks about the fact that while inching forward in terms of adaptation towards climate change, developing countries are falling behind when it comes to implementation of programs with regards to what they need to do, what are the policies that they need to bring into action in order to combat against climate change. So it is adaptation gap report has highlighted the gap in terms of what is required for the countries to do, and in fact policy action is not being served there, right? So that is where this particular chart indicates that various different countries have indicated at least one adaptation policy, right? Out of 26 countries without an adaptation policy, they don't have an adaptation, 10 are uninterested in developing any adaptation. So this is basically a mark of the various different countries. So countries which have implemented at least three, right? At least three of the adaptation policy, right? So this is very less. At least two of the adaptation policy, at least three of the adaptation, right? So that is basically indicated by the chart. And adaptation financing needs, what is required, and modeled cost of adaptation and impact of the Glasgow climate. So this tells you, this graph basically indicates what is the requirement of the funding, financing, and in terms of implementation of adaptation against climate change, and what is the reality of. Now, to meet the scale of climate change adaptation and challenge also, financing needs to shift reactive to basically something which is preemptive or predictive, right? So that was again a major finding which was indicated as per the adaptation gap report. What do we mean by that? That if the floods have come, if there's a cloud burst, then you are carrying out some, let's suppose, rescue missions and rehabilitation missions. It will always cost you more as compared to, let's suppose, preparing for the drought season from beforehand itself, water management beforehand itself, so that you are able to adapt against the impact of climate. This report, more importantly, has highlighted that the financial burden of climate action and climate adaptation lies on least developing countries. In the sense that when we talk about this report, this highlights that look, these developing countries, they expect, and even the developing countries under the principle of CBDR, they expect financing help from developed nations, right? That give us some amount of grant, give us some amount of money so that we can implement, let's suppose, drought resilient cultivation in our area, better Doppler radar systems to predict against the climate disaster. But then what happens? Developed countries, they don't give them that money. Developed countries ask them to approach Bretton Woods Institute like the IMF or the World. So, as these countries in need of money, they go to the doorsteps of World Bank or IMF. Then what happens? In that particular case, they are given loans, maybe at a low interest rate, but loans nonetheless. And they have to pay interest on those loans. So, think about it. In order to adapt against climate change, you are paying the interest to the loan. So, this is defeating the entire principle of CBDR and the aspect of climate justice, on the bulwark of which the entire convention to against climate change, framework convention to climate change, had been framed. So that is why climate action is not very forthcoming in various different countries, and that is why less developed countries, developing nations, many of them have thrown this plan out of the window straight up. Okay. Now, the adaptation finance gap has increased, right? That is what is required and what is actually available. Over a period of time, this gap is increasing. In the places of news video, remember, we had discussed a island nation in the western part of Africa, where it is required to spend billions of dollars, at least on an annual basis, to prevent that climate disaster in the region of West Africa. That is the region of Cabo Verde. right? So similarly, many of the small island nations, they are not having enough money to save themselves owing to the rising sea level, frequent cyclonic storms, etc. Current funding is substantially lower as compared to the requirement. Developing countries need at least $387 billion dollars annually by 2030, but how much are they getting? 100 billion. Okay, so there's a gap. Funding from private sector has been abysmal, providing only around one third of the funding required. Impact is significantly exaggerated. These developing nations develop. Let us take a look at the question. Which of these reports are released by UNEP? Adaptation Gap Report, Emissions Gap Report, Living Planet Report, and World Cities Report. How many of the above statements is or are correct? How many of these reports are released by UNEP? Beautiful, guys. So here, Adaptation Gap Report and Emission Gap Report, they are released by UNEP. They are annual report. Living Planet Report is released by which organization? Very good. Living Planet Report is released by World Wildlife Fund, and Living Planet Index is released by Zoological Society of London. Beautiful. Then World Cities Report is released by beautiful. When Habitat. Okay. I hope this is understood. So the correct answer in this case is going to be B. Now, WMO's World Meteorological Organization's Greenhouse Gas Bulletin 2023. WMO has, by the way, been instrumental. It is a scientific organization which was created around 1948, right? Now, WMO has been instrumental in carrying out that scientific work in terms of understanding the greenhouse gases, the concentration of N2O, nitrous oxide, methane, carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And they carry out a detailed study of this so as to ensure that the policymakers, they are informed enough before arriving at a next stage to combat climate change, right? WMO has also been instrumental along with UNEP for the formation of IPCC, right? So WMO and UNEP, they formed IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which carries out a scientific study, a detailed scientific study, and brings out assessment reports. Till now, six detailed assessment reports have been published, formed in 1988. Till from that point of time, assessment reports are released, which helps you understand the state of. Okay. Now, basically, WMO has released the Global Greenhouse Bulletin. That becomes important, right? It is one of the WMO's flagship publications to inform the UN Climate Change Conference, or COP, and it is in its 20th issue. As I told you, that scientific study to help the policymakers take an informed decision when they are talking about global finance, when they are talking about global stocktake, or even when they are talking about the renewed and new INDC. Now, greenhouse gas levels surged to a new record 2023, committing the planet to rising temperature for many. Now, greenhouse effect is something that we all would be aware of. Now, the presence of gases like carbon dioxide, methane, N2O, water vapor, sulfur hexafluoride, all these gases, what they do is that when the earth receives heat from the shortwave radiation emitted by the sun, right? The planet's surface heats up. It starts emitting the long wave terrestrial radiation. That terrestrial radiation is trapped by these gases. And this terrestrial radiation is then re radiated back the surface. Greater the amount of these gases, greater is the heat trapped, and as a consequence, the warming level increases. Is greenhouse gas, or is the greenhouse effect, inherently bad for planet Earth? The answer is always no. Because understand, greenhouse effect helps planet Earth to maintain its temperature even during night time. Otherwise, during night, the temperature would have cooled down quite drastically, as you observe in, let's suppose, Mars or even on Moon, right? So greenhouse effect helps maintain the temperature during nighttime. But then excess of anything is bad. Excess of this greenhouse effect means greater amount of trapped energy, which continues to increase or heighten the temperature. Okay. Now, the key findings, the CO2 concentration, right? That has been, in a way, indicated an increase. Okay. Over the years, the CO2. Now, CO2 is measured in which unit? Basically, parts per million. Methane is measured in parts per billion. CO2 in parts per million. So, analysis of the data shows that half of the CO2 emissions remain in the atmosphere. One quarter is absorbed by the ocean, and one quarter, 25%, 30% by the land ecosystem. And because of events like El Nino, La Nina, which causes a change in the sea surface temperature, the absorption rate of the CO2 changes. The rainfall, which occurs. Now, El Nino and La Nina brings about dry spells and wet spells in various parts of the globe. Let's suppose when you have a dry spell during an El Nino, that means in many of the regions, the trees will die. What is the natural dieback? So when the trees end up dying, their ability to sequester and capture carbon substantially plummets. It reduces. So that year, the carbon captured will be less by the terrestrial ecosystem. Maybe next year, due to increased rain, there is increased green cover in an area. So the ability to capture carbon, so there is that variation. So CO2 growth rate, if you take a look at it, the growth rate has not always been secularly positive, in the sense that if you observe, there have been peaks and plummets, peaks and plummets, right? These have been consistent. Methane accounts for 16% of the warming effect, and in the case of methane, observe you have parts per billion. 60% of the methane comes from anthropogenic sources, such as the rice cultivation. Energy is one of the larger emitters. Energy sector is the larger emitters of methane overall. Again, the growth rate is not secularly positive, but then indicates a rise and a fall as well. However, the concentration has been okay. N2O. Now, the globally average surface concentration of CO2 that reached 420 m, right? Methane 1934 parts per billion, and N2O 336 parts per billion. Now, these numbers are not very important. UPSC is never going to ask you these numbers, so don't ratify these numbers at all. What do you need to know? Trend. What is the trend that you need to understand? These values are 151%, 220, 265%, and 125% of the pre-industrial level. So, a question, if it is framed that the average concentration of which of the greenhouse gas out of CO2, CH4, and N2O has peaked as compared to the pre industrial levels. So, again, I will repeat, average concentration of which of these greenhouse gases, CO2, N2O, and CH4, has increased the maximum as compared to pre industrial level. That gas will be methane. Okay. Methane has increased almost basically by 265. Okay. Now, so warming effect by long lived greenhouse gases increased by 51%, with CO2 accounting for majority of the warming effect. That's it. Right. Last time the planet experienced a comparable amount of CO2 was almost 3 to 5 million, right? That is all that to confirm. Reason, anthropogenic actions, climate feedback, the feedback that I just told you about. For example, wetlands and peatlands, they lose water due to warming, release more carbon compounds, release greenhouse gas, more water, more warming, more water is lost. So that feedback loop continues. El Nino condition, wildfire events becoming more common. So that basically leads to greater concentration of greenhouse gas. Let's take a look at the practice question. Now, consider the following statement regarding the Greenhouse Gas Bulletin 2023 released. It is a biennial report prepared by WMO. to track the carbon emissions of CO2, have indicated a consistent increase over the past decade. Let me know the correct answer in this case. So basically, if you think about it, right, is it a biennial report? So it is prepared before the conference of parties, right? It is basically prepared before the conference of parties. Now, emissions of CO2 have indicated a consistent increase. Is that the case? No, they have not indicated a consistent increase. And this is an annual report as well. So both of them end up being okay. Now, protected planet report. So this is released by UNEP, World Conservation Monitoring Center, right? UNEP WCMC, right? UNEP WC, okay? That is one organization along with IUCN and World Commission on Protected Area. What does this report talk about? Protected planet. So how much areas are protected? Which are the regions which are actually protected? Okay. So under the Convention on Biological Diversity and there the provision of Kunming-Montreal Agreement, there is the talk of or the target of bringing 30% of the area of land and water under conservation by the year or protection by 2030. So that is the concept of the protected planet. So it highlights the progress made ahead of achieving the target 3 of the Kunming-Montreal Agreement of the Global Biodiversity Framework, which is a part of Convention on Biological Diversity. Now, this is basically about to increase the protected area by at least 30% of terrestrial protected areas, right? Terrestrial, inland, and coastal and marine ecosystem to increase the biodiversity and ecosystem services as well. So, at the same time, ensuring the indigenous population, they are not their importance is being ignored, their opinion is being ignored. So it is about inclusivity in that as well. Now, what is the highlight of this particular report? Again, important. Only 17% of the land and inland waters and 8.4% of the oceans and coastal areas are under. What is the target? 30%. What is the reality? 17 and 8%. Right? Increase is minimal since 2020. Strong progress indicated in the ocean conservation, but mostly restricted to national jurisdiction. That is why the world is now aiming at BBNJ. That is the High Seas Treaty. That is the area beyond your EEZ, what is referred to as the high seas. There, the amount of protection of the key biodiversity areas is amongst the minimal. Okay, so that is where conservation is required. Less than 5% of the land and 1.3% of the marine areas have been assessed for effective management purposes. Okay, now, though over two-thirds of the key biodiversity areas are partially or fully covered, observe that the terrestrial key biodiversity areas, almost 48% of them are covered. But when we talk about the marine biodiversity, key marine biodiversity areas, only 46% of them have been covered. So there is an urgent need for that implementation of high seas treaty. Yes, BBNJ. Perfect. Okay. Now, indigenous communities govern less than 4% of the protected area. Now, under the Convention on Biological Diversity, there is a protocol which talks about importance being paid to the indigenous community, fair access and benefit sharing. Which is that protocol? That is your Nagoya Protocol. Beautiful. So that Nagoya Protocol is not being right. So when we talk about the protected areas, so there, how they are managed, IUCN has classified them under various categories, like wilderness area and so on. You don't need to again go for ratification. This is just for your information sake. Okay. Now, understand the question and let us solve the question associated. Consider the following statements. Marine key biodiversity areas form the maximum chunk of protected regions in the world. Protected Planet Report is prepared annually by UNEP, WCMC, and has been generated to support CBD. The bit of the statements is RAR. Correct. What do you think? Beautiful. In this case, the first statement, marine key biodiversity areas form the maximum chunk of protected area. No, it is the terrestrial key biodiversity area, which forms the maximum protection. Protected Planet Report is prepared annually by UNEP WCMC and generated since the Earth Summit, right? It is something which is being done recently, right? So here, UNEP WCMC is there along with IUCN. That is also right. The correct answer is okay. Now, World Air Quality Report 2024. That is again something which has made a lot of headlines. Now, this has been released by which agency? Swiss company IQ Air. And this World Air Quality Report, does it measure all different kinds of pollutants? No. It only ends up measuring PM 2.5, particulate matter 2.5. That's it. Okay. So the concentration of PM 2.5 is something which is measured here. Correct? Now, the report presents PM 2.5 air quality data collected from the various different world. India, in this, has basically improved its performance ever so slightly as compared to last year. One of the most polluted cities is also in the region of Assam Meghalaya border, that is Birnihat. So these are some of the important areas that you need to understand. Now, the PM 2.5 concentration, WHO has got a standard guideline, right? A standard metric. And the various different regions, they basically are exceeding that limit. Okay. So PM 2.5, particulate matter, released mostly due to the burning of the fossil fuels, burning of organic matter, as well as the dust particles. Many of the times when they are released, all of them end up releasing PM 2.5. So this PM 2.5 can settle down on the ice sheets and can increase the amount of heat absorbed, increase the level of warming, and can be absorbed by the cardiovascular system, leading to strokes as well as the lung infections, right? Now, this is the overall finding indicating the amount of PM 2.5 concentration in the region of China and in the region of Indian subcontinent, which is much higher as compared to what the prescribed limit is, right? So in these areas, basically in regions like India, the prescribed limit is exceeded at least by 7 to 8 times or at least by 10 times. Only 17% of the global cities meet the WHO air quality requirement. Only 17, right? Seven countries meet the requirement. They are Australia. And what is the WHO parameter? PM 2.5 concentration should be 5 microgram per meter cube, right? That is the PM 2.5 concentration, which is tolerable. So Australia, Bahamas, Barbados, Estonia, Grenada, Iceland, and New Zealand, these are the ones which fulfill them. Obviously, you cannot remember all of them. Just have an idea where these countries are or which these. The five most polluted regions of the world in terms of PM 2.5, India is at fifth. The most polluted region is Chad, right? You have Chad, then Bangladesh, Pakistan, DRC, and then India. India's own PM 2.5 concentration has increased or has basically improved as compared to last year. It has not increased, it has improved. So when we talk about India's own PM 2.5 concentration, there's a 7% decrease in India's PM 2.5 levels. So in 2023, it was 54.4 micrograms. It has reduced 50 micrograms. Now, Oceania is the cleanest sub-region across the world because obviously Australia meets the parameter. Australia forms a majority of the region of Oceania. So Oceania is one of the cleanest regions with 57% of the cities meeting the WHO guideline. Six of the world's top 10 polluted regions and 13 of the world's 20 most polluted regions are in India, with Birnihart, Assam Meghalaya border, topping the list at PM concentration of 120. Why is it that Birnihart is the most polluted? Because in this region, you have obviously the transportation, but at the same time, mining is very prominent. Mining also involves the process of burning of fossil fuel. So that is where, again, PM 2.5 is released in large quantity. Okay? Now, then we come to Conference of Party number 16 to CBD. Now, we have discussed UNFCCC, now CBD. So when we talk about CBD, again, the outcome of Rio Summit, Rio Summit 1992, isn't it? The funding agency, funding body is what? GEF. Now, when we talk about CBD, it has got two protocols. Which are those two protocols? One is Cartagena Protocol, and the other is Nagoya Protocol. When we talk about the COP, Conference of Parties, is it held annually? No, every 2 to 3 years. Years. Okay, so this is the brief about the Convention on Biological Diversity, right? The goals of CBD, there are three goals of CBD. Now, it is the exact three goals based upon which the government of India passed the Biodiversity Act 2002. So, which are these three goals? Conservation of biological diversity, conservation, then sustainable use, sustainable use, and then fair access and equitable benefit sharing with the local population. Equitable benefit sharing. Okay. So for this, you had the implementation of Cartagena Protocol, and for the third, you basically had the implementation of Nagoya Protocol. It was during the finalization of the Nagoya Protocol that the world arrived at the HE biodiversity targets to be met up till 2020. But what to be done after 2020? For that, you had the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, which was arrived at in 2022. That is the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. Now, when we talk about Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Targets, it is a successor to HE targets. Okay. Now, what are the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Targets? Basically, first, 30 by 30 agreement to reduce or to bring about 30% of the area under conservation by the year 2030. Impact of invasive alien species to be reduced by 50% by 2030. Okay. Reduce the impact of pollution on the loss of biodiversity, benefit sharing, which has to be brought into practical purposes, right? The use of digital sequence information, global finances involving the private sector to the tune of almost $200 billion annually. Obviously, you can imagine that other than the finances, the world is serious on the other targets, but the world is nowhere close to implementing the financial mechanism and the financial requirements. Now, what were the outcomes of Conference of Party 16, which was held recently? Now, this was held in Kali. Where is Kali situated? In which part of the world? In which country? Do let me know in the comment section. So, when we talk about the Conference of Party 16, so a special designated Kali fund was actually established. Very good. Colombia. Beautiful. So was established to ensure fair and equitable sharing of benefits. That is something which the world is stressing upon. Why? Because the indigenous communities, they are losing. Okay. 50% will be used for self-identified needs of the indigenous community. That is whatever the indigenous community requires, not what you prescribe, but what they require. So that is where 50% of the Kali fund will be focused upon, right? Setting up a subsidiary body that will include indigenous groups and people in discussion for the conservation of biodiversity. Again, the major issue of the Conference of Party 16 has been the issue of financing, the access to finance, right? So, agreement to develop a new strategy for resource mobilization to help secure US dollar $200 billion annually by 20. Obviously, again, that is an exercise in futility. India's contribution, India has basically generated its own national biodiversity conservation plans, right? India has been increasing the areas under conservation and more protected areas, more number of tiger reserves, more number of elephant reserves, more number of Ramsar sites. So the protected regions are increasing, right? India has also been instrumental in the creation of the International Big Cat Alliance. India represents almost 75% of the global population of tigers. As per the St. Petersburg Declaration for tigers, India is the only one which has managed to double the tiger population. St. Petersburg Tiger Declaration was arrived at in 2010 amongst the tiger range countries. Out of all the tiger range countries, it is India which has managed to double the tiger population. The target year was 2022. We have managed to more than double the tiger population, right? So these are some of the steps and the key interventions which have been provided by India. The amount of money which is being spent for protection is increasing. There has been amendment which has been brought to the Wildlife Protection Act 1972 as well, and there has been an increased participation in the global conventions for conservation. So that is where India's role is also substantial. Let us take a look at the practice question. Consider the following statements about COP16 to the CBD. The COP meets annually to decide on the future course of actions to be taken. Kali Fund seeks to help the developing countries to increase the number of protected areas across the globe. Impact of invasive alien species to be reduced by 70% by 2020, right? Which is the correct answer in this case. So here you have to find out which of the statements have been incorrect. So the first statement, the COP meets annually, incorrect. COP meets every 2 to 3 years. Kali Fund seeks to help the developing countries to increase the number of protected areas. It's true. Impact of invasive alien species basically has to be reduced by 70% by 2023. Is that correct? To 50%. Right? So I hope you know the correct answer in this. Okay? Now, Nature Conservation Index, where India, China, all of them, they have been labeled as one of the bad performers. So, first of all, when we talk about Nature Conservation Index, which is the organization which has released it. So, this is a study which has been carried out by Goldman Sonnenfeld School of Sustainability and Climate Change at the Ben Gurion University in Negev and biodb.com, a not non-profit website. So, in case you are unable to ratify or memorize these names, I would suggest you that after few repetitions, this is something which should be identifiable. In case you are unable to do so, just understand that none of the famous agencies that you know, UNEP, WWF, none of them have prepared this. Okay. So you should be aware about who has prepared this. Okay. Now, Nature Conservation Index basically evaluates the conservation efforts using the four different markers: land management, threats to biodiversity, capacity and governance, the policy making, and the future trend. So these trends, or this basically the parameters on which the marking is done, that also becomes important. Land management, threat to biodiversity, capacity and governance, and future trend. These four become important. Okay. India has got a score of 45.5, 45.5 out of 100, right? Has been ranked 170. China, 164, right? So they are very poor performing. Now, why? Because of over exploitation of resources, pollution, deforestation, and other factors such as the significant biodiversity loss which are being caused in the region of Middle East, Oceania. Now, here, the aspect of land management is again where India has lost a lot of marks. Okay. Now, here, the best performing countries, European nation of Luxembourg, Baltic nation, Estonia. Then you have the Jutland Peninsula. There you have Denmark, Finland, the Nordic country, then UK, Zimbabwe, Australia. These are the better performing ones. Obviously, not important to rectify all of them. The poor performing ones, that is where India finds it at dismal 170, right? So that is the position of India. Reason for India's poor ranking: habitat loss and fragmentation due to infrastructure extension of agriculture, leading to biodiversity loss, high use of pesticide in our agricultural system, which is again impacting the food chain, bioaccumulation and biomagnification, lack of enough conservation in marine areas in particular, enforcement to prevent smuggling has been inadequate, and most important, inefficient land management. So, because of these, India's ranking has been very okay. Now, which of the following are parameters used to calculate nature conservation, rate of deforestation, rate to biodiversity, land management, and governance and capacity? Which of them? All of them. Now, so again, that is where you have to repeat it again and again. So basically, there are four different parameters: land management, threat to biodiversity, capacity and governance, and future trend, isn't it? Out of them, if you observe, rate of deforestation, no. Threat to biodiversity, land management, capacity and governance, is it the same as the third one here? So basically, these three, right? Future trend is missing out of. The correct answer is C, that is only. Okay. So repeat these multiple times. You will basically get it correct and you will be able to retain it. Emission Gap Report 2024, again released by UNEP. Now, United Nations Environment Program has released the Emission Gap Report ahead of COP29 to you. All these reports generally are released as a precursor to Conference of Parties to Framework Convention on Climate Change for informed decision. Okay, for informed climate action is the key findings. Global greenhouse gas emissions, they set a new record in 2023, obviously an increase from 2020. Now, if you consider the emission from the energy sector is the maximum. And what is included in the energy? Energy sector includes fuel production, buildings, transportation, right? And when we talk about transportation, in that, the road transportation has got the maximum share, right? Then comes industry, and then comes the power sector. Okay. Then comes the industrial processes, cement, metals, all of them, they occupy a major share. Then comes agriculture, right? Then you have the land use change, which happens. Land use change also, for example, deforestation will lead to greenhouse gas emission, waste, and other materials. So, this is basically the order of the amount of greenhouse gas. Okay. Now, across the G20 members, the greenhouse gas emissions have increased. If you take a look at this table, which is indicated in the report, China has got the maximum greenhouse gas emission as when you consider the year 2023, right? Then you have US, then you have India, and then the European Union combined. However, if you consider the region or the growth in terms of the emissions, India has indicated a 6.1% growth. US has indicated a decline of 1.4, right? But per capita, India's emission is only around 2.9 tons per capita, which is amongst the lowest in the top five, if you consider, right? Amongst the lowest in the top five. Historical emissions that you take a look into, US has got the maximum historical emissions for the past 150 years. These are some of the data pointers, not all of them, only India's position, per capita, annual growth. This is something which you should retain, right? Now, in terms of implementation of nationally determined contribution, India is still on the right side of the curve, the better side of the curve. This is where India is, right? So that is where India wants to be present in this particular portion. But nonetheless, India is, in terms of the emission and in terms of its declared naturally determined contribution, is set to reduce the amount of greenhouse gas emissions going ahead into the future, right? Now, achieving net zero by 2050 requires again what? Finances. That is the theme of the day. That what is required is money, and what is not available is also money, right? So, the amount of money required is huge, about 1% of the global GDP. But what is being promised and what is being given is almost 0.1% of that global GDP. Reduction of at least 7.5% each year until 2035 is essential to keep the 1.5 degrees Celsius warming level. Renewable energy and their mixture needs to improve. That is the emission gap report. Let us take a look at the practice question. Consider the following statements in the context of the recently released emission gap report. It is an annual report released by UNFCCC. Historically, US has the highest burden of emissions over the past 150 years. Power sector accounts for the largest source of emission. How many of the above statements is or are correct? What do you think? It is a report released by UNFCCC? No, right? It is a report released by UNEP. Then historically, US has got the highest burden of emissions over the past 150 years. Correct or incorrect? Yes, correct. Right? Then power sector accounts for the largest source of emission. Overall, it is the energy sector, but within the energy sector, which is the largest source? Is the power sector, isn't it? Almost 26% of that. Overall, if you have to consider amongst energy, agriculture, then waste, all of that, in that energy will be maximum. But within that energy, power sector will be right. So here, the correct answer is going. Okay. Now, steel carbon. This was in news. So with the help of this, what I want you to understand is basically teal carbon is something, the amount of carbon which is stored in the wetlands. The carbon stored in the wetland, right? Just like peatlands store carbon, similarly, wetlands also store carbon. That is what is referred to as steel carbon. Now, in India, for the first time, study had been carried out about the teal carbon storage. Now, with the help of this, what is relevant for your examination is the carbon rainbow. That is, what is the meaning of purple carbon? What is the meaning of brown carbon? What is the meaning of gray carbon, blue carbon, green carbon? Right? So the carbon rainbow. UPSC has asked question previously about the green carbon, right? But as is the trend in the prelims, you would observe in the previous year question, if you have observed the trend, many of the questions asked in UPSC are taken from the US government websites, be it EPA and so on. So this is the rainbow carbon, carbon rainbow, which we talk about from USGS. Okay, so let us take a look at what is this steel carbon and then shift our focus into the carbon rainbow. So here refers to the carbon stored in non-tidal freshwater wetlands. Non-tidal. because tidal wetlands will have brackish water when they are impacted by tide. So non-tidal freshwater wetlands encompassing carbon sequestration in vegetation, biomass, and dissolved and particulate organic matter. Right. So this is the color teal, which is basically the amount of carbon stored in non-tidal freshwater wetland. Now, first study in India has been done in which region? Dev National Park in Rajasthan. Right? We have discussed this again when we talked about the Ramsar sites. We had discussed Dev there. So you can take a look at that video as well. So Dev National Park in Rajasthan's Bharatpur district has highlighted the significance of wetland conservation to address the challenges. Because again, here also the same logic is followed as is the case with the peatland. The carbon which is stored by the plants that is trapped in the freshwater ecosystem. Having said that, if the water is lost, maybe due to sedimentation, maybe due to evaporation or any other drainage due to agriculture, then that will lead to the release of gases like 2 and CH4. And that will increase the level of warming, which will fuel or trigger a self sustaining feedback loop. Now, this is the carbon rainbow I want you to focus upon for your prelims. This is important this year and even for next year, by the way. So, here we have the two divisions, right? So, the first division is this one: purple, blue, teal, and green. This is the carbon stored. Carbon stored. Then you have black, gray, brown, and red. This is basically carbon emitted. Carbon emitted. Okay. So when we say purple, carbon captured through air or industrial emissions. The carbon which is captured from the air emission or the industrial emission. Blue carbon, carbon stored in oceanic plants and sediments. Teal carbon, carbon stored in fresh water and wetland environment. Green carbon, carbon stored in terrestrial. Black carbon, carbon released by burning of fossil fuel. Gray carbon, carbon released through industrial emissions. Understand, purple carbon, carbon which is absorbed from the industrial emission. But gray carbon is the opposite. Carbon released during the industrial emission. Brown carbon, carbon released when there is incomplete burning of biomass, organic matter. That is the brown carbon. Red carbon, carbon released through biological processes through biological particles on snow and ice that reduces the albedo, the red carbon. So these are basically the 8 different kinds of carbon, right? That you should be aware about. Black, gray, brown, red, emitted. Purple, blue, teal, green, absorbed. Okay? I hope this is. Now, importance of teal carbon. So basically, at the global level, the storage of the teal carbon is almost around 500 petagrams of carbon. Petagrams is how much? Almost 10 to the power 15 grams. 1 petagram is almost 10 to the power 15 grams. So 500 petagrams of carbon storage is in the form of wetland ecosystem. Peatlands, freshwater swamps, and natural freshwater marshes account for the storage. So teal carbon also involves the amount of carbon stored in many of the marshes as well as peat. Right? Now, the study which was done at Kuno National Park has revealed levels of methane emission, high levels of methane emission, because the water as it is lost, all that methane will be emitted into the atmosphere. So that necessitates the type of or the reduction of the discharges, right? So that water which is being lost, that has to be. So out of this, where has the study been carried out? Dev. And what are the basic carbon types? The emitting type, that is red, then you have gray, then you have black and brown. Absorbing type, purple, blue, green, and okay. Now, after this is a previous year question. which I hope should be easy. What is blue carbon? So that answer is straight away carbon, which is captured by oceans and coastal ecosystems, isn't it? Now, when we talk about a practice question, take a look at this practice question. Let me know what the correct answer. Which of the following is or are correctly matched? Gray carbon, purple carbon, and black carbon. Which are correctly matched? Take a look at it. Gray carbon, emitted through industrial emissions. Purple carbon, captured through industrial emissions. Black carbon, emitted due to incomplete combustion of the organic matter. So in this, first two are correctly matched, isn't it? The third one indicates which kind of carbon here? Third one indicates a brown carbon. This is not a black carbon. Black carbon is when you have the burning of the fossil fuel, isn't it? So here, the correct answer is going to be A, 1 and 2. Okay? I hope you have got it correct. Now, then a topic was in news, and that is the topic of sonoluminescence. What is sonoluminescence? The name in itself is basically self descriptive. Sono, sound, luminescence, producing light. So, a kind of a sound producing. So, what is important is which species does it, right? So, this is the phenomena which species does it. So, what is the phenomena? Sonoluminescence is the phenomena in which small gas bubbles, very small gas bubbles in a liquid, emit short bursts of light when exposed to intense sound. Okay? Small gas bubbles in the liquid, they will emit light when there is intense amount of sound waves which are hitting this. Okay? The light is produced when the bubble undergoes rapid compression and expansion when it is hit by the sound wave. This is something which was discovered way back in around 1934 itself as a scientific phenomena. It has been found to be present in certain species, that is the pistol shrimps. Pistol shrimps, that is where it has basically come in news. So, alternating high and low pressure phases, because the sound wave travels like this: expansion, contraction, isn't it? So, alternating high and low pressure phases of the sound waves causing the gas inside to heat up, and as a consequence of that heating up, they tend to emit some amount of light, right? It was something discovered in 1934 by German engineers while they were studying the sonar tech, right? So when a tiny bubble in a liquid was hit by a strong sound wave, it expanded or it heated up and emitted light. It is indicated by whom? By the pistol shrimp. So when the shrimp snaps its claws together, it shoots out a jet of water, right? That moves so fast that it creates those low pressure bubbles. The bubble then collapses, producing a loud sound, intense heat, and oftentimes a brief flash of light. So that is your sonoluminescence, light produced due to the sound. You also have the concept of bioluminescence. Bioluminescence is generally produced by any of the species, like some of the flies, the moths, etc., but also mostly by the benthic species, right? For example, the species living in deep water, ocean ecosystem, they end up producing many of the planktons in that area. They have the property of bioluminescence. Many of the benthic species, they have the property of, benthic species are those which live at the ocean bottom, at the ocean. So they end up also indicating the feature of bioluminescence. Photoluminescence and bioluminescence. Both of them were in news throughout the last year. Okay. Now, UNEP Champions of Earth Award has been given to Madhav Gadgil. You would have studied about Madhav Gadgil Commission for Western Ghats, then Madhav Gadgil Committee for the groundwater as well. So you have many of the Madhav Gadgil commissions out there. So Madhav Gadgil has basically got the lifetime Indian ecologist renowned for his work on the Western Ghats, has been named UNEP Champion of the Earth 2024 in Lifetime Achievement category. Okay. So here, when we talk about this particular award, Champions of the Earth, established in 2005, UNEP award, so obviously will be awarded by UNEP itself to honor individuals, groups, and organizations. Who gets the award? Only individuals? No. Groups and organizations, all of them. Right? Categories: lifetime achievement, policy leadership, inspiration and action, science and innovation, entrepreneurial vision. This is something you should keep in mind. And Madhav Gadgil for lifetime achievement, he has got these two areas. Very brief snippet in news, something you should keep in mind. Right? Living Planet Report. Living Planet Report is basically released by World Wildlife Fund for Nature. Okay. Now there are two things. One is Living Planet Report, and one is the Living Planet Index. Living Planet Index is released by Zoological Society of London. Living Planet Report is released by WWF. Okay. Now, latest edition measures the average population change and the population size in terms of the species. They have indicated basically a decline of 73% in the past 5 decades when we talk about vertebrate species. So, a massive decline. What is important for your examination is which species have indicated a decline. There is a massive decline of 73%, but which ecosystem has experienced maximum decline? That is important for your exam. So, here, when we talk about the terrestrial species, a decline of 69%. Marine species, a decline of 56%, obviously over the past 5 decades, 1970 to 2020. When we talk about freshwater species, a decline of 85%. So the maximum decline has been observed in the freshwater species. Why? River pollution, agricultural extension, industrial pollution, dumping of municipal solid waste, reduced flow, ecological flow of the water, fishing, bycatch, transportation. There have been multiple reasons why freshwater species have indicated a maximum decline. Okay. Now, here they have suffered the heaviest decline. Now, fastest decline in which region has occurred? So, which ecosystem and in which region? Both of them have to be kept in mind. So, at the regional level, fastest decline has been seen in Latin America and the Caribbean. Latin America and Caribbean, 95% decline. Why? Aided by the region of the corals, right? Aided by the warming of the sea, increased cyclones and hurricanes in the region. So that has impacted biodiversity. Followed by Africa and then the Asia and the Pacific. Okay, so Latin America and Caribbean, followed by Africa, followed by Asia and Pacific. Why Latin America and Caribbean? Sea level rise, loss of corals, as well as hurricanes. Okay? Now, the decline has been very less dramatic in Europe and Central Asia. Why? Why in Europe there is less decline? Because there, whatever loss has to happen of biodiversity has already happened. Okay, so now there is not much biodiversity left in order to indicate a decline. Whatever biodiversity is left is present in zoos and some of the protected areas. That's it. Out in the nature, not much of a biodiversity is left. So where will they indicate a decline? And then North America even further. Okay. Now, habitat degradation and loss by the food system, agricultural extension, aquaculture, the most reported threat, right? Followed by overexploitation, invasive species, the disease, habitat degradation and loss due to extension of agriculture. Extension of agriculture. In the region of Asia, the major problem is the problem of pollution. Whereas in the region of Caribbean, the major problem is the problem of climate change, initiating sea level rise, cyclones, hurricanes, and loss of coral ecosystem. So here, this is basically the different areas and how the decline has happened. So you will observe very substantial decline in the region of the Americas, right? The green one. Then a substantial decline to be observed in the region of Asia as well. In both these areas, the global decline is okay. Now, impact of a declining ecosystem or a declining population, you see, and this is important to understand. When you consider any particular species, as the population declines beyond a threshold level, let's suppose we consider tigers, let's suppose we consider lion. Now, they have their own role to play in the entire ecosystem chain, be it as a keystone species, certain cases when you consider corals, be it as, let's suppose, a foundation species, indicator species, and so on. Now, when their population is substantial, they are able to withstand the threats of the nature, disease, and other pollution aspect as well. But when the population falls below a threshold level, then, for example, even if you consider the bees, they won't be able to carry out pollination to the same extent. If you consider the trees in a region, if they are very less, they won't be able to carry out the proper healthy water cycle, right? So that is where the threshold population has to be maintained. So as the population is declining continuously, that threshold is being breached. Okay. So when population falls below a certain level, species may not be able to perform its usual role within the ecosystem. Stable populations over a long term provide resilience against disturbances like disease, extreme effect. So, for example, so here, if you take a look into it, so loss of population of fruit-eating animals, right, has led to the decline in the fruit-eating animals. They help in dispersal of the seeds of the fruit. Now, when these fruit-eating animals are less, as a consequence, that much germination of the new trees is not happening. So the population density of the new trees, that is getting lesser, right? As a consequence, the other species which are dependent on the trees, they are also getting impacted. So it is a chain effect. Okay. So one kind of species will impact the other. Okay. Now here, if you observe loss of one kind of fish in that area, will have a devastating impact overall in the surrounding. Now, there are multiple tipping points which have been indicated in this report as well. What is a tipping point? Tipping point is basically when the change has happened to such an extent beyond which the situation deteriorates and degrades naturally. That is the tipping point. For that, you don't need to have an extra amount of effort, extra deforestation, etc. That is not required. As soon as the population declines to a particular level, deterioration happens automatically. Right. So, in the natural world, they occur when individual or combined pressure, they end up having a long-term impact. These are the various tipping points across the world when it comes to biodiversity. Mind you, there are tipping points when it comes to climate change also. There are tipping points when it comes to the biodiversity. So, in terms of oceanic circulation, the loss of or the slowing down of the global conveyor belt, Atlantic meridional overturning circulation, that is a tipping point. In terms of Asia, you have the loss of forest as one of those tipping points. In the case of South America, the dieback of the Amazon, that is a tipping point. The loss of the Congo rainforest, that is a tipping point. Melting of the permafrost in the uh, temperate region in Alaska, Canada, in Siberia, these are all basically tipping. Okay. Now, this is a chart which indicates, and this can be framed into an MCQ. That is why I've put it here. This indicates that basically how once you cut down the trees in a certain region, for example, what is happening in Asia as well as in the region of South America, once you cut down the trees in a certain region, the impact will be felt in the regeneration of the water cycle, right? So much water won't be provided into the atmosphere, and hence not enough cloud formation, and hence not enough rainfall. So once you cut down the trees, there is scarcity of rainfall. As a consequence, the remaining amount of trees won't be able to grow naturally. As a consequence of that, the region will be, in a way, deforested and in a way barren naturally. So that is why deforestation, particularly in the region of northeastern part of India, that has to be curtailed. And in Asia, in the region around Indonesia, Malaysia, that deforestation rate has to be curtailed. Now, global goals have been also indicated in this Living Planet report. So here, basically, conserve the species, biodiversity conservation, restore 30% of the degraded land, conserve 30% of the land, then avoid the impact of invasive alien species by 50%, reduce pollution risk impact by 50%, sustainable consumption. Sustainable consumption will bring about sustainable production. Now, I was telling you that how the present food systems are impacting the nature, how the present food systems are impacting the biodiversity. So the current global food systems are responsible for 27% of the global greenhouse gas emissions due to agricultural techniques which are used. 70% of the fresh water withdrawals, excessive irrigation, climate friendly and climate sustainable agriculture is not carried out. The main threat to 86% of the species undergoing extinction because of loss of mangroves, corals, and so on. 90% of the tropical deforestation carried out by the present food production. 82% of all the agricultural land are used for grazing, and so this is impacting the nature and the natural balance immensely. Okay, so here consider the following statements with reference to the Living Planet Report 2024. Now, WWF prepares the Living Planet Index, which gives an idea about the amount of degradation experienced by the biodiversity. Maximum loss of biodiversity has been experienced in the freshwater ecosystem. Let me know what is the answer in this case. Okay. So here the first statement. Is the first statement correct? Does WWF prepare the Living Planet Index? No. WWF prepares the Living Planet Report. Zoological Society of London prepares the Living Planet Index. Then maximum loss of biodiversity has been experienced in the freshwater ecosystem. So we have to find out which of them are incorrect. So here the answer is going to be A. That is one only. Okay. Now, some of the species which have been in use. Halari donkey. Now that has been in use. Now, where is this Halari donkey? We have covered it previously under places in use, if you recall. So basically, this is to be found in the Halar region of Gujarat. Okay. So when we talk about the Halar region, which is the Halar region? This is the area of Gujarat, which is also referred to as the Halar region, right? To the south of the Kutch, run of Kutch area, in the Saurashtra area. Yes. So that is basically the Halar region. Now, Halari donkeys are in particular demand across the country right now, owing to their incredible load bearing capability and also owing to the milk product which is generated from. Okay, so that is where Halari donkeys have been in news. So some of the snippets might be relevant for your exam. So they are considered endangered. The surviving population is expected to be somewhere around 500. A detailed study has still not been carried out. White in color, larger and more resilient than the other donkey breeds. Important domestic animal in the semi-arid landscape of Jamnagar and Dwarka districts in. Okay. Now, historically used to carry large amount of loads for building dams, forts, hilltop temples, rest houses, and so on. Now, here overall, presently the cost is around 1 lakh per Halari donkey, and they also have a lot of demand over the milk. So Halari donkey milk is known for its sweetness, and the milk powder can fetch close to around 7,000 rupees per kg. So that is about Halari donkey. Horseshoe crabs have been in use. Now, horseshoe crabs, these are the species which predate the existence of even dinosaurs. Horseshoe crabs are very, very important when it comes to the study for medical research. They are considered to be the living fossils. Now, they might appear to be quite prehistoric in terms of their appearances. They have 10 legs in many of the cases in order to walk through the ocean floor as well. Now, the Zoological Survey of India, along with the Odisha Forest Department, they have joined hands to tag the horseshoe crabs along the state. Now, horseshoe crabs in India are to be typically found across the northeastern part of the Indian coastline and also across some of them are also to be found across the region of Great Nicobar. So, here, when we talk about the horseshoe crabs, India is home to two species of horseshoe crabs, right? So, here, both of them are found in northeastern coast of India, especially across the Odisha and the West Bengal coastline. One of the oldest living creatures who have lived millions of years without undergoing any physical change, known for a very strong immune system. Now, the blood is used for preparation of rapid diagnostic reagents. Okay, all injectables and medicines are tested with the help of the horseshoe. So that is where they are beneficial for the pharmaceutical industry. Very, very beneficial for the pharmaceutical industry. They have the very famous blue blood, which they are associated. This year, horseshoe crabs have been discussed multiple times in multiple different forms. So please beware of a question, along with the hulok gibbons. Hulok gibbons have been in news. Why? Because where they are found, that is the Hulongpur Wildlife Sanctuary. Now, these hulok gibbons, the only ape species to be found in India, they are to be found in the region of Assam, the eastern part, Indo-Burma biodiversity hotspot. That is where they are found. Now, why they are in news is because here a precursory node has been provided. This is where you have the Hulongpar Gibbon Sanctuary. This is where a node has been provided for hydrocarbon exploration. Now, when you have hydrocarbon which is being explored, you have a lot of methane emission, lot of deforestation does happen. As a consequence, the hulok gibbons will directly be impacted. So that is why hulok gibbons they are in. Okay, so they are known as the smallest and fastest of all the ape species that are there. Inhabit the tropical and subtropical forests, southeast. High intelligence, distinct personalities, and family bonds. So they are represent one of the 20 ape species across the world. India's only ape. India, how many kind of gibbon species you find? You find the western hulok gibbon and you find the eastern hulok gibbon, right? Western hulok gibbon basically inhabits the state in the northeast, restricted to the south of the Brahmaputra and east of the Dibang River. South of Brahmaputra, east of Dibang. Outside India, found in eastern Bangladesh and northwest Myanmar. IUCN endangered. But when we talk about eastern, though specific pockets of Arunachal and Assam in southern China and northeast Myanmar outside India, IUCN vulnerable. So western hulok gibbon and eastern hulok, both of them are found in typically where in the region of Assam, some parts of Arunachal. Eastern is to be found in Arunachal. The western is to be found in between the Dibang and the Brahmaputra. Okay, but overall, which biodiversity hotspot? The Indo-Burma biodiversity hotspot. Then African penguins have been in news. They have been declared as critically endangered. Which portion of Africa do we find the African penguins? That is important. So African penguins, unique for their black beaks that you observe. It is not with all the species of penguins that you find the black beak, right? White plumage and black beaks, they have been classified as critically endangered by the IUC. So, in which portion of Africa do you find them? So, all the way across the Namib Desert, right, to the southern part of Africa. That is where you find them. Now, you will have a distinct breeding range, okay, from the southern part of Namibia all the way to the Algoa Bay. That is the breeding range. However, the presence is something which extends both east and to the western coast. Okay, but not beyond Angola and not beyond Mozambique, right? That is the African penguin. Primary threat is food scarcity, aided by climate change and competition from commercial fishing. When you have commercial fishing which is being carried out, the amount of fish present in the ocean nearby for the consumption, that is very less. And as a consequence, scarcity of food is something which is very impacting them very drastically. Fewer than 10,000 breeding pairs are left globally, mainly in South Africa. And the decline has been quite substantial. In the early 1990s, the number was close to around 42,000. Now it has plummeted to 10,000. And they could be extinct in the wild by 2035. So, critically endangered, in which region of Africa are they found? That's it. Then we come to orangutan diplomacy. Orangutan diplomacy is carried out by which country, first of all, and why? And it has eventually been withdrawn. And what is the aspect associated with orangutan? They share 4% of our genes. So their conservation is very important as well, right? So I have already mentioned in this session earlier that Malaysia, Indonesia, they have been gaining a lot of defamation, lot of bad name and notoriety, owing to the fact that they carry out a large scale deforestation of tropical forest in order to grow palm oil, the palm oil that they export across the world. As a consequence of that, the naturally present tropical forest, which can support large amount of biodiversity, is being replaced by only one kind of monocultural practice, which is impacting the biodiversity. Now, orangutan is one of the species which is impacted. Now, basically, what Malaysia has followed is on the footstep of China's panda diplomacy. So Malaysia has basically said that look, if you are taking basically palm, then give us some money so that we can support the orangutan. But then this was not taken kindly by the world because it was seen as a barter system of sorts. So they announced the plans to gift orangutans to whom? To the palm oil buying countries. Okay. To the palm oil buying countries, the plans to gift orangutan, following the footsteps of panda diplomacy. Now, here, instead, the new plan, now they have tweaked the plan. The new plan invites the importers to sponsor orangutan with the funds going for conservation of orangutan. Okay? So that is basically the orangutan diplomacy. Now, the threat that the orangutans face is owing to the loss and the fragmentation of biodiversity. Now, it is, if you see this image, on the basis of this image itself, you had a PYQ. If you recall, which of the species uses a stick in order to get ants to feed itself? That was a PYQ. This image solves that PYQ. Now, orangutans are basically primarily arboreal, the found on top of the trees, right? They are highly intelligent and share 4% of the genes with humans, making their conservation much more important. Indonesian island of Sumatra, Malaysia, and Indonesian part of Borneo. Borneo Islands consists of different parts, so the Indonesian part of Borneo. Three species, Bornean, Sumatran, and the Tapanuli, that is to be found. Daytime feeders primarily, right? With diet consisting of fruits, leaves, lychees, figs, etc. But they also consume insects, occasionally bird eggs. So are they complete herbivores? No. Omnivores is what they are. So they have a semi-solitary behavior, mostly solitary amongst the great apes. If you consider all the great apes, the silverback, all of them, if you compare them, this is the most solitary of the apes that you find. They do indicate social tolerance, especially when there's a lot of fruit available around. Okay, so coming together in groups, which are known as parties, right? This is a PYQ, which basically the image solved the PYQ. Which one of the following makes a tool with a stick to scrape insects from a hole or a tree in a tree or a log of wood? So that is where orangutan was asked. Okay. Now, red panda has been in news. Why? Because a couple of red panda have been brought from Rotterdam in Netherlands to the zoo in Darjeeling in order to initiate the breeding, right? In order to improve the breeding, in order to increase the conservation efforts for red panda. So, red panda, also known as the lesser panda, herbivore, shy, solitary, arboreal. Long bushy tails for balance, to hang and to suspend, and is an indicator species for ecological change. If let's suppose the bamboos and the thickets in the forest they end up changing, the red pandas or the land use pattern changes, the red panda population will substantially begin to decline. Okay, where are they found? Again, the two biodiversity hotspots which shares the population of red panda in Asia. One is the Himalayan biodiversity hotspot, other is basically the Indo-Burma biodiversity hotspot. So Bhutan, China, India, Myanmar, and Nepal. So you have the Himalayan biodiversity hotspot and Indo-Burma in both of these biodiversity hotspots. They are to be found. Okay. Now, conservation status endangered as per CITES Appendix 1 and as per Wildlife Protection Act listed under schedule. By the way, how many schedules do you have under the newly amended Wildlife Protection Act? Wildlife Protection Act, which was amended after that, there are four schedules now. Earlier, how many schedules were present? Earlier, you had six schedules. Now you have four schedules. Which is the schedule which is completely eliminated? The schedule for vermins has been completely eliminated, right? Some of the schedules have been merged. Okay, so that is basically where, and why had the amendment been done for the Wildlife Protection Act? It was amended to adhere to the principle of CITES, Convention for on International Trade in Endangered Species of Flora and Fauna, to adhere to the principles of CITES to prevent from India being blacklisted again under CITES. The Wildlife Protection Act was amended in 2020. Okay, these are again relevant. Then narwhals, which are considered to be the unicorns of the sea. So these are the whale species which have these long horns. Now, they have been basically observed to indicate a change owing to the change in climatic conditions. They have been known to stun the species of fishes with their long horns. They are typically to be found in the higher latitudes, many of the areas of the globe. So, here they are medium sized toothed whales found in deep Arctic waters. Okay, males have long spiral tusk up to 3 meters long, which is an elongated upper left. These kind of questions are nowadays being asked in the exam. Okay, so it is different from all other toothed whales because narwhals don't have any teeth present in their mouth. They have that long snout kind of a thing, which is nothing but upper left tooth. Some narwhals have up to two tusks, while few of them have none. They use their tusks to stun and manipulate prey, especially the Arctic char. Arctic char is what? Is a kind of a fish, a kind of an orangish, yellowish orange tinge of fish which grows in the which in a way spawns in the region of Arctic that is consumed. Narwhals, they mostly feed upon the population of fish. Humpback whale is the other whale species which has been in news. And it has been in news owing to its migrational pattern. Because a humpback whale, which was being observed, is known to have migrated from the coastline of South America, that is the western coastline of South America, where it was earlier detected, to the region of western coast of Africa. A distance covering more than 13,000 kilometers is the zone of migration. Now, these humpback whales, mind you, they are to be found almost across the globe. Okay, These are some of the physical features: the length up to 60 feet, weight up till 40 tons. Okay, so lifespan about 80 to 90 years. Tanglement in the fishing nets as a bycatch, vessel strikes, harassment, and sometimes even ocean noise. That leads them sometimes to get beached in shallow waters, and sometimes hunting also tends to happen. Now, when we talk about these humpback whales, they are known to migrate from the tropical to the temperate waters or the colder waters in order to feed on large population of the plankton, right? So this is the overall geographical distribution of the waters that you see, where you will find the population of humpback. So humpback females are larger than males. Important point to be kept in mind. Mainly black or gray with white underside, right? So they have large knobs on the head, jaws, and the body, and that is a specific feature. Long migration between polar and the feeding grounds in summer and tropical or subtropical breeding grounds. So between latitude, that is what the migrational pattern is. So they have a unique method of feeding which is called bubble netting. What is bubble netting? Now, this is a unique feature of the humpback whales. What do they do? And listen to this very carefully. You will understand this. It is a simple mechanism. So, the humpback whales, they blow up bubbles in water. So, wherever, let's suppose, they find that there is a lot of plankton population or small fish population. Now, what they will do, they will start blowing bubbles here. Now, when they start blowing bubbles from the deeper part of the water, the bubbles rise up. It forms a kind of a wall of rising air. So, the small fishes, they are unable to cross this. Then they will move here and they will emit bubbles. So, like that, they create a kind of a bubble wall. Okay. Many of the times, two or three of these whales are known to do this. They cover the entire region with bubbles. As a consequence, the fishes, all of them, they are trapped in this region. Slowly and steadily, they keep on closing down the area of the bubbles. And that is when eventually, when all of the small fishes are concentrated in a region, that is when they emerge up and they consume as much fish as they can. So that is one of the strategies. So this is what is known as bubble netting. Okay, there's not a separate net that these whales have. This is how they. Okay. Conservation status IUCN, least concern as per sites included in Appendix 1. Bubbles are produced basically from the snouts that they have, the kind of breathing vent that they have. Now, white winged duck, which is also the state duck of Assam. So, white winged ducks, important for your current affairs. So, rare endangered white winged ducks, which is the state bird of Assam, also known as Tiohan, right? It was spotted in the region of Dehing Patkai National Park. So, this is a large, rare, and endangered species of duck found in freshwater wetlands and dense tropical forest of South and Southeast. In Assamese, known as Tiohans or spirit duck because of its ghostly call. The call is, in a way, not shrill, but then a deep guttural voice that you can think about. Considered one of the most threatened waterfowl species in the world, is critically endangered to be found in Dibru-Saikhowa, Kaziranga, and the wetlands of Arunachal Pradesh. The Ohan or the white-headed, white-winged duck. Keep that in. Okay. Now, Gangetic dolphin. Now, Gangetic dolphin has been in news owing to the census which has been carried out and owing to the geotagging also which is being planned. But then, here, when we talk about the Gangetic dolphin, it is important for us to understand the properties of the Gangetic dolphin, the other riverine dolphins across the world, and also relevant for you to understand about Project Dolphin. These are the three areas which are important for the exam. So, Ganges River dolphin only live in fresh water and is essentially blind, cannot see. It moves with the help of echolocation, emitting sound waves absorbing those sound waves. That is how they end up moving. So they hunt by emitting ultrasonic sounds, which bounces off from fish and other species, found frequently alone or in small groups. Calves are chocolate brown at birth, and then they have the gray, kind of brownish smooth, hairless skin as adults. Again, here females are larger than males and give birth once every, right? Yes, they are not under threat because of the crocodiles. Status endangered. Okay. Now, habitat freshwater rivers population of 3,500. Now, Project Dolphin, which has been launched by India, talks about the conservation of both freshwater as well as saltwater dolphins, the marine dolphin. So, not only are the Gangetic dolphins covered, but even the marine dolphins are covered under this. To strengthen the biodiversity and create employment opportunities is also a target associated. So, fragmentation of the habitat, hunting, bycatch, net, the fishing nets. These are the frequent threats to the survivability of the dolphins. The Project Dolphin aims to remove all of them. Dolphin conservation in India is carried out across the Ganga River system in the region of Bhagalpur in southeastern part of Bihar. Right. So Ganges River dolphin, a species of freshwater dolphin, primarily found in Ganga and Brahmaputra rivers and its tributaries in Bangladesh. Okay. Now, this is the chart that I want you to retain. So basically, when you consider the river dolphin, these are your river dolphins. So Amazon river dolphin, which is also known as Oto, then Ganges river dolphin, also known as Sos, Indus river dolphin, which is also known as Bulan, Yangtze River dolphin, YG, which has gone extinct in the wild, right? So this is declared functionally extinct. Then you have the La Plata River. So presently, amongst the river dolphins, you have four of the river dolphins which are present. But then, not river dolphins, but can also be found in fresh water. You have the Irrawaddy dolphin in India. Where do you find the Irrawaddy dolphin? You'll find the Irrawaddy dolphin even in the region of Chilika, right? So there also you'll find Irrawaddy. Then Australian snubfin dolphin, then finless porpoise, and Sixi. So these are some of the other dolphin species, but primarily I want you to retain the Amazon River dolphin, Boto. Then you have to understand the Gangetic River dolphin, Indus River dolphin, and the case of La Plata River dolphin. The Yangtze River dolphin has been functional. Okay. Now, four-horned antelope. Four-horned antelope, unique because of the four horns. Mostly the antelopes will have two horns. They have four horns. So, sighted for the first time in the Sagar district, which was earlier the Nora Dehi Sanctuary, is known as the Virangana Durgavati Tiger Reserve now. Now, this is also known as Chosinga, and it is endemic to India and Nepal. Observe the four horns, which that is the unique characteristic of this particular species of antelope. Okay, mostly the antelope species have two horns, they have four horns. Now, they range from the foothills of the Himalayas in the north, in the region of Nepal, all the way to the Deccan Plateau in the that is their natural habitat in open, dry, deciduous forest. Deciduous forests are the most dominant forest across the country. That is where you will find them. Inhabit areas with significant cover from grasses or heavy undergrowth closer to the water bodies or the source of moisture. Right? Only males in the species grow horns. One of the horns are located between the ears and the other the forehead, like a unique. That is the unique characteristic of this antelope. Usually diurnal and solitary. However, sometimes also to be found in the groups. Now, as per the IUCN Red List, is vulnerable. Okay. Now, here, if we consider another species, pot-bellied eagle owl has actually been spotted wild after a long period of time. So here, when we talk about the Page Tiger Reserve. There, the first photographic record of spot-bellied eagle owl has been done. So it is the forest eagle owl, okay, found in variety of habitats, subtropical, tropical, forest, woodlands, grasslands in the tropics, found in which region? So the regions are important. The four-horned antelope found in India, Nepal. Then, when we talk about the eagle owl, this is to be found in India, Sri Lanka, Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh, and other parts of South Asia. So, the entire subcontinent extending into South Asia. Wingspan can be very large, 1.7 meters. The upper parts of the body, the coloration pattern, right? It is primarily nocturnal, which is the case with most of the owl species. These are some of the other factors of the body coloration which you can take a look in. Okay. Now, apex predator, the prey is rodents, which is the case of most of the owl species, small mammals, some small reptiles. IUCN status, least concern, cites Appendix 2, and as per Wildlife Act 4. Clouded leopard. Clouded leopard is another species, big cat. Now, why is the clouded leopard in use? So basically, this has been cited in certain areas. But here, important to understand where are clouded leopards to be found. Understand, clouded leopards, they will share the same kind of prey species as is the case with the other big cats. So where you have the reduced population of leopards, tigers, etc., there the clouded leopard population will be much higher. So Nepal, Bangladesh, Assam, to the region of Indochina, the entire region all the way to Sumatra and Borneo, and northeastward to southern China, the former Taiwan. Now, population numbers are thought to be lower outside the protected areas. In the region of Borneo, the population is substantial because they don't have a competition from the other big cat species. They prefer to live in lowland tropical rainforest. However, they are also to be found in the Himalayan foothills, hundreds of meters above sea level, almost 2,700 meters above sea level. So, as I was telling you earlier, when we were talking about the mangroves, they are also to be found in the mangrove swamps, but generally dry woodlands and secondary forests. Average lifespan 12 to 15 years, primarily nocturnal. That is okay. Now, the bar-headed goose. Now, these are migratory and some of the highest flying species of birds you will come across. While airplanes do not dare to cross the Himalayas, these species they easily fly over the Himalayas in their migratory. Now, when we talk about bar-headed goose, they can fly at the altitude of 25,000. Think about it, right? Where oxygen level and temperature levels are extremely low. They are able to fly at ease. So they migrate to the parts of South Asia during the winters. And basically, the geographical range extends from northeast southern part of the country. The entire, when we talk about the East Asian corridor, the flyway that you have. Least concern is the IUCN. Now, they are monogamous and are seasonal breeders, right? This is the coloration and the pattern of the body structure. Okay. Now, green sea turtle. Green sea turtle. Again, owing to the unique coloration and owing to the sighting. It is one of the largest hard-shelled sea turtles, unique among sea turtles in that they are herbivores. Not all the turtle species that you find will be herbivores. These are herbivores, eating mostly sea grasses and algae. Diet is what gives their fat a kind of a greenish color. Okay. So it is not the shell which is green, but the fat which appears to be green color. And that is where the green turtle name comes from. Largest nesting populations found in Costa Rica and Australia in the southern hemisphere. Throughout the world, mostly tropical and subtropical regions. Similar to other sea turtles, they migrate long distances, just like the olive ridley turtles that we have. Similarly, even leatherback turtles, they migrate long distances. Olive ridley turtles, they migrate in the region of the east coast. Leatherback turtles, they migrate to the region of Great Nicobar. Similarly, when we talk about green turtles, So they end up migrating long distances between the feeding ground and their nesting site. Okay, longer than 2,600 kilometers. So they can be almost more than 1 meter in length and weighing about 150 kg, which is huge. So they have a smooth carpage which varies in shape, and this is the case of appearance. Now, the bottom shell is again of a different coloration, IUCN red list in D. Okay. Now, Eurasian Wimbrel. This has also been cited in India. So they have an extensive range that spans across 5 continents: North America, South America, Asia, Africa, and Europe. They breed in the subarctic regions, in the region of Siberia and Alaska during the summer months. And then they migrate for feeding to the south. And that is when they move to South America, Asia, Africa, and this is the zone of migration. So, Alaska, Siberia, breeding ground, and then during the winter, they move south. Okay. So, habitat winters mainly across the coastline, coastal wetlands, mangroves, marshes. They are known for high pitched call, that is, repetitive notes that they emit. IUCN, Kodo millet. Kodo millet was in news. Why? Because in the region of Madhya Pradesh, the consumption of kodo millet led to the death of large number of elephants, particularly in the area of Bandhavgarh. Right. So in the same region, large number of elephants they died. So that is where kodo millet, which is consumed, now that became poisonous. So that is why kodo millet continues and becomes important for the prelims. So this is also known as the cow grass across central India and the regions of Deccan Plateau. Also grown in the region of South Asia and Southeast Asia, Philippines, Indonesia, Pakistan, Vietnam, West Africa, Thailand, in all those areas. High in fiber, right? Help manage a variety of conditions. So, regulation of blood pressure, then migraines, asthma, in all of these. So, they were to be found in the region of Bandhavgarh. They are found in many of the areas naturally in central part of India, consumed in large quantities by the elephants in Bandhavgarh, which impacted them. It is said that basically a fungal growth did happen in the kodo millet, which turned the entire mixture poisonous, and that is why the elephant. When we talk about Bandhavgarh, even though protected areas we will cover separately next week. When we talk about the places in news for India, I will talk about the summarization of all the important protected areas. But nonetheless, when we talk about Bandhavgarh, in between the Vindhyan and the Satpura range in the Umaria district of Madhya Pradesh, declared a national park in 1968 and then became a tiger reserve. Valleys, hills, plains, and the old historic Bandhavgarh fort is what you will find. Consists of moist deciduous, dry deciduous forest as well, and bamboo stretches, which is ideal for the herbivore population at the same time, encouraging the very critical tiger population in the region as well. Now, tiger relocation has been in news. Particularly, a tiger has been relocated to Simlipal Tiger Reserve. Because in Simlipal, you have the tigers which have been developing pseudo melanistic characteristics. You have the tigers which are developing the black coat. Okay, so Odisha government has translocated a tigress named Jamuna from Tadoba Andhari Tiger Reserve in Maharashtra, Simlipal Tiger Reserve. So that is where a tiger has been translocated, aimed at enhancing the genetic diversity in Simlipal, where there are concerns that in Simlipal there is inbreeding. Due to inbreeding, there's a lack of genetic diversity. See, genetic diversity is always important to carry out the good traits for the future generation. So, inbreeding basically means that the incorrect traits are basically passed on as a consequence. You have the pseudomelanism, which is developing the black tiger population. NTCA has given the approval, and Odisha tiger estimation conducted in 24 found that there are 24 adult tigers in Nepal with the notable presence of pseudomelanistic tigers. Now, these pseudomelanistic tigers, basically, there is a large scale production of melanin Now, melanin is the one which gives the black coloration, right? So that produces high eye, hair, and skin pigmentation, resulting in black skin or black coloration. Now, Royal Bengal tigers of Simlipal belong to a unique lineage with higher than normal melanin. Now, if there is a kind of a breeding exercise with other tigers, then maybe there is a chance of normalcy. But inbreeding is leading a kind of black tiger population. They are not entirely black, and hence the name pseudomelanism associated with the tiger population. By the way, across the country, only Simlipal Tiger Reserve is the one where you will find the presence of these black tigers. Now, the high number of pseudomelanistic tigers in Simlipal raise concerns about inbreeding and the lack of genetics. That is why, in order to conserve and maintain biodiversity, functional biodiversity is important, then genetic biodiversity is important, ecosystem diversity is important. At the same time, species diversity is important. So these are the four types of diversities which are very important in order to ensure long-term survivability of the species. Now, great Indian bustard, there has been artificial insemination which has been successful in order to produce or reproduce a bustard. So that in itself is an encouraging news story because the bustard population is declining with a great rate. So, in order to conserve the bustard population, if natural breeding exercises are not working, this is something can definitely work. So, that is why it is in news. Now, it is the state bird of Rajasthan which is critically endangered. So, there has been a successful hatching of an offspring, artificial insemination in Jaisalmer district. Okay. Now, fewer than 150 great Indian bustards are left in the wild in India, with 94% residing in the desert region of Rajasthan. Okay. So, this is basically about the great Indian bustard, always in news. They were in news. They are mostly found in the region of the Desert National Park. They were again in news owing to the impact on the Uran lands, which the matter went all to the doorsteps of the Supreme Court. Now, golden headed cisticola. Now, this is a bird species which was discovered for the first time in the Shola National Park in the Idukki region, that is, the region of the Western Ghats across Kerala. Southwestern Ghats, after a long time that a cisticola has been sighted. Right? It is omnivorous, primarily eating invertebrates, the worms, etc., insects, and the small slugs, also eating the grass seed. Now, least concern, where is to be found? Australian and Asian countries. In India, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, and Northern Kerala. Okay, so that is basically your golden headed system, right? So these are some of the important species which have been in news along with the topics that we have discussed. This basically brings me to the end of the session. And let me tell you that all the topics that we have discussed today, if you manage to revise them, if you just ensure that you recall all of them at the time of the examination, you will be in a very good position when the prelims examination does come. Having said that, the protected areas, in the case of protected areas, we have discussed separately the various different Ramsar sites which have been in. We have discussed them separately in a separate video. But when it comes to the national parks and the wildlife sanctuary, there has been a PYQ discussion which is already there in the channel. You can take a look at it. But there are other different protected areas, wildlife sanctuaries, and national parks which have remained in use, compilation of which is something that I intend to bring forward when we have a discussion for the places in use, the India aspect. We have discussed the world version. Now we will have a separate session for the India aspect, and that notification will be given to you. So, if you like the video, if you like the content which is being provided to you, if it is helpful, please don't forget to click on the like, share, and the subscribe button, and click on the bell icon so that you get an idea about those important videos. If you have benefited and if you have added some content through this video, put that in the comment section. Till we meet again, take care of yourself, revise well, relax. Goodbye. Thank you.